These passengers in 1A and 1B, they don't look right for first class. Jennifer Walsh's voice carried just enough volume for her colleague to hear, but not the boarding passengers streaming past Gate 23 at LAX. She held her tablet against her navy blazer fingers, scrolling through the manifest with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for 25 years. Her blonde hair was pulled back in the regulation bun, not a strand out of place, her smile professionally fixed, but her eyes calculating. "What do you mean?" asked Alex Rivera, the junior flight attendant adjusting his tie nervously. At 30, he was still learning the unspoken rules that separated good crew members from great ones, according to Jennifer's philosophy. Jennifer tilted the screen toward him, pointing at two names highlighted in the first-class section: M. Reynolds and Z. Reynolds. No platinum status, no gold medallion, no corporate booking codes. Just bought tickets. She said the last part like it left a bad taste in her mouth. In my experience, Alex, when young people pay full price for first class without status, there's usually a reason to double-check. Through the gate window, she watched two black women approach the boarding line. Both were dressed professionally, but casually. The older one in a tailored cream blazer over dark jeans. The younger in a navy jumpsuit that looked expensive, but wasn't formal. They moved with easy confidence, the kind that made Jennifer's jaw tighten unconsciously. "They look professional to me," Alex offered, but Jennifer was already turning away. "We'll see," she replied, that phrase becoming prophetic in ways she couldn't imagine. Maya Reynolds, 28 and VP of Client Relations at Reynolds Digital Solutions, handed her boarding pass to the gate agent with a polite smile. She'd been on hundreds of flights, but there was something about the way the flight attendant at the jetway had looked at them that felt familiar. Not aggressive, not obviously hostile, just assessing. Like she was solving a puzzle that Maya and her sister Zara somehow didn't fit. "You feel it too," Zara whispered as they walked down the jetway. At 25, she was the director of marketing for their father's company, and she'd inherited both his business instincts and his ability to read a room. That attendant was scanning us like we were suspicious cargo. Maya nodded her hand unconsciously, checking the encrypted tablet in her leather tote. The device contained real-time data from Reynolds Digital's airline partnership monitoring systems, including comprehensive access to this very airline's booking and operations infrastructure. Her father had always taught them to travel prepared, especially when traveling while black in spaces that didn't expect them. Probably nothing, Maya said, but she was already mentally switching into what the family called corporate mode. The heightened awareness that came from years of navigating rooms where their competence was questioned before their credentials were even known. They found their seats, 1A and 1B, and settled in with practiced efficiency. Maya opened her tablet to review the technical specifications for the Phoenix presentation, while Zara scrolled through her phone, checking the engagement metrics on their company's latest social media campaign. Both were completely absorbed in their work when Jennifer Walsh appeared at their row. "Excuse me, ladies." Jennifer's tone was crisp, professional, but with an undertone that made both sisters look up immediately. "I need to verify your boarding passes." Maya blinked. "We already showed them at the gate." "I understand, but we've had some irregularities with seat assignments this morning." Jennifer's smile never wavered, but her eyes were cold. "It'll just take a moment to confirm everything is correct." Zara pulled off her earbuds, suddenly alert. What kind of irregularities? Jennifer's tablet was already in her hand, stylus poised. Sometimes our system double books seats, especially when there are last-minute changes or upgrades. The pause before upgrades was deliberate, loaded with implication. Maya's expression remained calm, but inside, she was rapidly calculating. This wasn't standard procedure. She flew first class regularly, and had never been asked to re-verify seating after boarding. Her fingers moved subtly across her tablet screen, activating Reynolds Digital's flight monitoring protocol. Within seconds, she had access to the real-time manifest crew assignments and system logs for their current flight. According to my information, Maya said quietly seats 1A and 1B were booked 3 weeks ago, paid in full, no changes or upgrades. She turned her tablet screen slightly, not enough for Jennifer to see the detailed system access, but enough to show she had resources. Everything appears to be in order on my end. Jennifer's professional mask slipped slightly. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of your seats so I can verify no. Zara's voice was soft, but absolutely firm. We're not moving until you show us documentation of this alleged irregularity. The word alleged hung in the air like a challenge. Other passengers were beginning to notice the interaction phones discreetly appearing as the tension became palpable. Jennifer straightened her voice, gaining authority. Ma'am, as senior flight attendant, I have the authority to resolve seating discrepancies. I'm asking you to cooperate with a standard verification process. Maya looked directly into Jennifer's eyes, and I'm asking you to explain why this standard process is being applied to us specifically when you haven't verified any other passengers' seating. The question landed like a stone in still water, the implications rippling outward to everyone within hearing distance. Jennifer's face flushed slightly, but her resolve hardened rather than softened. Sometimes, she said, voice dropping to just above a whisper, when things don't look typical. For first class, we need to be extra careful. The words were out before Jennifer could stop them, and the moment they hit the air, Maya knew this confrontation had just shifted from procedural to personal. Her tablet chimed softly with an incoming priority message from Reynolds Digital Security Monitoring System. Potential discrimination incident detected. Auto-logging enabled. Zara reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over the video record button. Would you mind repeating that? About things not looking typical for first class. Jennifer realized her mistake immediately, but there was no taking it back. The cabin had gone quiet around them, and she could feel eyes watching, judging, recording. Her 25-year career had been built on maintaining order, on keeping first class exclusive and proper. But somehow, in trying to protect that standard, she'd revealed something ugly underneath. I didn't mean, she started, but Maya was already shaking her head. Yes, you did, Maya said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms where she was the only person who looked like her. You meant exactly what you said. And now we're going to find out what happens next. Jennifer Walsh had no idea that she was staring at the daughter of Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Digital Solutions, the company that powered 60% of the airline's critical booking security and operational systems. She had no idea that Maya had just activated a comprehensive audit protocol that would analyze every booking decision, seat assignment, and passenger interaction for patterns of bias. All Jennifer knew was that 2 young black women were refusing to cooperate with her authority, and in her mind, that made them exactly the kind of passengers who needed to be managed. She had no idea that she was about to become the case study for how quickly the balance of power could shift when assumptions collided with reality. The flight hadn't even taken off yet, but Jennifer Walsh's career was already beginning its descent. 3 rows behind the unfolding confrontation, Robert Kellerman folded his Wall Street Journal with sharp, deliberate creases. At 64, the retired insurance executive had perfected the art of projecting authority through posture alone. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his navy suit pressed to knife-edge precision, and his Rolex caught the cabin light as he adjusted his cufflinks. Robert had specifically requested seat 1A when booking this flight. Specifically requested, it paid the premium, and expected it to be available. Instead, he'd been relegated to 3C, watching 2 young women girls, really in his estimation, occupy the seats he'd wanted, the seats he deserved. "Excuse me." Robert's voice carried the practiced command of someone accustomed to being heard. Jennifer turned toward him, relief visible in her eyes at finding an ally. "I believe there's been a mistake with the seating arrangements." Maya looked over her shoulder, taking in Robert's expensive suit, his air of entitlement, the way he was inserting himself into their conversation without invitation. "And you are Robert Kellerman." He didn't offer his hand, just his name, like it should mean something. "I reserved seat 1A 3 months ago. Premium booking platinum status with the airline's partner hotel chain." His eyes moved deliberately between Maya and Zara. "I'm not sure how this confusion occurred, but I'm confident we can resolve it quickly." Dr. Sarah Chen, seated in 2B, looked up from her medical journal. A pediatrician at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, she'd spent 15 years advocating for patients whose voices weren't always heard. She recognized the dynamics playing out in front of her, the polite language masking something much uglier. "Excuse me, Dr. Chen," said her voice calm but penetrating. "Are you suggesting these passengers don't belong in their assigned seats?" Robert turned toward her with the patronizing smile he reserved for people who didn't understand how business worked. "I'm suggesting, doctor," he'd noted her medical journal, "that when there are clear irregularities in seating assignments, they should be resolved efficiently. Some of us have experience with how these systems work." Zara's thumb had already hit record on her phone. The red dot in the corner of her screen indicated she was live streaming to her company's Instagram account, which had 50,000 followers. Her voice carried the studied calm of someone who'd grown up in executive meetings. "Mr. Kellerman, could you explain what specific irregularities you're observing, other than the fact that we don't look like what you expected to see in first class?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Robert's face reddened slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "This isn't about appearance. This is about proper procedure, about ensuring that legitimate paying customers, receive the service they've purchased." Alex Rivera had been watching the interaction from the galley, his stomach growing tighter with each exchange. In his training, they'd covered customer service de-escalation, handling difficult passengers' emergency procedures. They'd never explicitly covered what to do when senior crew members seemed to be creating the problem rather than solving it. "Jennifer," he said quietly, stepping closer to the senior attendant. "Maybe we should check the manifest together. I can pull up the digital records. I've already reviewed." "The records?" Jennifer snapped, her professional composure beginning to crack. "The issue isn't with our systems, Alex. The issue is with passengers who may have misrepresented their booking status." Maya's tablet chimed again. The Reynolds Digital Monitoring System had now flagged 17 separate data points, indicating discriminatory behavior, prolonged verification requests, seat assignment challenges, use of coded language, and passenger profiling. The system was automatically creating a comprehensive incident report, complete with audio analysis and behavioral pattern recognition. "Jennifer Walsh, employee ID 4582. Maya said, reading directly from her screen. 25 years with the airline based in Los Angeles, currently assigned to Flight 847 to Phoenix. She looked up, meeting Jennifer's shocked gaze. "Your personnel file indicates excellent customer service ratings. I'm curious what changed today." Jennifer's face went pale. Who are you?" "Someone who pays attention to patterns," Maya replied. She tapped her screen again. "For instance, in the last 6 months, you've requested seat verification from passengers in first class 11 times. 9 of those passengers were people of color. The 2 who weren't had obvious markers of youth or unconventional dress. Would you like me to continue with the data analysis?" Robert stepped forward, his voice gaining edge. "Now see here, this is harassment. You can't just access airline personnel files." "Actually, I can. Maya said, turning her tablet toward him. Reynolds Digital Solutions provides the security and audit infrastructure for this airline. We monitor discriminatory patterns as part of our fraud prevention services. What we're seeing right now is a clear pattern of selective enforcement. Dr. Chen stood up her medical training, giving her natural authority in situations requiring calm intervention. As someone who's flown this route monthly for 3 years, I can confirm that this verification process is not standard procedure. I've never been asked to reconfirm my seating assignment after boarding. Zara continued, streaming her voice steady as she provided commentary for her growing live audience. What you're witnessing is what happens when assumptions about who belongs where collide with reality. My sister and I are sitting in our assigned seats we purchased with boarding passes that match our identification. The only irregularity appears to be the color of our skin. The viewer count on her stream was climbing rapidly. 200 viewers, 400, 800. Comments were flowing in real time, with viewers sharing their own experiences of travel discrimination and expressing support. Jennifer looked around the cabin, suddenly aware that multiple passengers were recording that the situation had spiraled far beyond her control. But rather than de-escalate, her defensive instincts kicked in. "This is not about race," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This is about maintaining standards, about ensuring that first-class passengers receive the premium experience they've paid for." "And what about our presence threatens that premium experience?" Maya asked. "Our professional attire, our quiet behavior, our valid boarding passes, or is it something else entirely?" Alex Rivera stepped forward, his tablet in hand. "Jennifer, I've pulled the complete manifest. Seats 1A and 1B were booked by M. Reynolds and Z. Reynolds on March 15th, paid in full, with a corporate credit card. No changes, no upgrades, no irregularities whatsoever." Jennifer turned on him, her authority challenged from all sides. "Alex, I'm the senior attendant on this flight. I don't need a junior crew member questioning my judgment." "You're right," Alex said quietly. "You don't need me to question your judgment. Your judgment is questioning itself." Robert Kellerman watched the dynamic shift with growing alarm. What had started as a simple request to correct an obvious mistake was becoming something much more public, much more complicated. His business instincts told him to extract himself from the situation, but his pride kept him rooted in place. "Look," he said, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Let's not turn this into something it's not. I simply requested my reserved seat. If there's been a booking error, the airline should resolve it professionally without all this drama." Dr. Chen looked directly at him. "Mr. Kellerman, you said you reserved seat 1A 3 months ago, but these passengers are clearly in their correctly assigned seats. So either you're mistaken about your reservation, or you're suggesting they should be moved based on criteria that have nothing to do with their booking status." The logic was unassailable, and Robert found himself trapped between admitting error or revealing bias. His face flushed deeper as he realized the corner he'd painted himself into. Maya watched the interplay with the analytical eye that had made her successful in corporate negotiations. She could see the moment when each person in the confrontation realized the stakes had changed, when what started as a simple challenge to their presence had become a public examination of bias, assumption, and power. Her tablet showed that Zara's live stream had now reached 2,000 viewers and was climbing rapidly. The incident was becoming viral in real time. But more importantly, the Reynolds Digital Monitoring System had gathered enough data to trigger automatic escalation protocols. In 30 seconds, alerts would be sent to airline executives, corporate compliance officers, and the Reynolds Digital legal team. The informal challenge to their seating was about to become a formal case study in discrimination. Jennifer Walsh still thought she was dealing with 2 uppity passengers who needed to be put in their place. She had no idea she was about to confront the family that controlled the very systems that kept the airline operational. The balance of power was about to shift dramatically, and it would happen at 35,000 feet, with hundreds of witnesses watching every moment. The cabin had developed the peculiar quiet that comes when everyone is pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Passengers in nearby rows had their books open to the same pages they'd been reading 10 minutes earlier, their phones positioned to capture audio without appearing obvious. The morning's routine boarding had transformed into something much more significant. Jennifer Walsh stood in the aisle, trapped between her professional training and her personal convictions. Her 25 years of experience told her to de-escalate, to find a diplomatic solution that would restore order. But something deeper, something she'd never had to examine directly, insisted that these two young women simply didn't belong in the seats they occupied. "Ladies," she said, attempting to regain her professional tone, "I'm going to ask one more time for your cooperation. If you'll just step into the aisle for a moment while I verify your booking details with the gate." Numb. Maya's response was quiet, but absolute. "We've provided our boarding passes, our identification, and our booking confirmation. You've verified our seat assignments with your colleague. The only thing you haven't provided is a legitimate reason for this continued harassment." The word harassment landed like a slap. Jennifer's face flushed deeper, but before she could respond, Robert Kellerman decided to assert his authority again. "Now, listen here," he said, standing and moving closer to the front of the cabin. "This is getting ridiculous. I've been flying this airline for 15 years. I know how these things work. When there are irregularities, they get resolved quietly and professionally, not with all this confrontation." Dr. Chen set down her medical journal and looked directly at Robert. "Mr. Kellerman, what you're describing sounds exactly like what's happening. These passengers are handling this quietly and professionally. The confrontation seems to be coming from the insistence that they prove they belong somewhere. They've already demonstrated they belong." Zara adjusted her phone angle to better capture the interaction, her live stream now approaching 3,000 viewers. The comments section was exploding with reactions, shared experiences, and growing outrage. Reynolds' family was starting to trend organically as viewers shared the stream to their own social media accounts. "For our viewers just joining," Zara said, her voice maintaining the measured tone of a professional narrator, "we're currently being asked to vacate our assigned first-class seats by a flight attendant who has provided no documentation of any booking irregularity. The gentleman you see inserting himself into this conversation is a stranger who believes he deserves our seats based on his 15 years of customer loyalty." Alex Rivera watched from the galley, his hands shaking slightly as he held his own tablet. The digital manifest was crystal clear. No booking errors, no system glitches, no legitimate reason for the verification requests. But challenging Jennifer directly would end his career before it had really begun. Still, his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. "Jennifer," he said quietly, stepping closer to her. "The gate staff confirmed their boarding passes. The manifest shows no irregularities. Maybe we should—" Jennifer cut him off sharply. "I need you to trust my experience here. I've seen situations like this before. Sometimes passengers find ways to access seats they haven't actually purchased." The implication was clear, and it rippled through the first-class cabin like an electric shock. Maya felt her jaw clench involuntarily. Beside her, Zara's grip on her phone tightened. "Jennifer Walsh," Maya said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the cabin. "Did you just suggest that we fraudulently obtained our seating?" I suggested. Jennifer replied, trying to maintain her authority, that irregularities sometimes require additional verification. "That's not what you suggested," Dr. Chen interjected. "You suggested that these passengers might have gained unauthorized access to first class. That's a very specific accusation." Maya's tablet had been quietly processing data throughout the confrontation. The Reynolds Digital Solutions had now identified Jennifer Walsh's employment history, performance reviews, and previous passenger interactions. The pattern was subtle, but clear. A consistent tendency to challenge passengers who didn't fit her predetermined image of first-class travelers. Jennifer Maya said, consulting her screen, in your 25-year career, you've filed 17 incident reports regarding suspected seat fraud. 16 of those reports involved passengers of color. The 17th involved a passenger wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Would you like to explain that statistical anomaly? Jennifer's face went white. How are you accessing that information is confidential. That information is part of our security monitoring systems, Maya replied. Systems that flag patterns of discriminatory behavior as potential fraud indicators. Congratulations, Jennifer. You've just been flagged. Robert Kellerman sensed the ground shifting beneath his feet. What had seemed like a straightforward customer service issue was revealing layers of complexity he hadn't anticipated. His business instincts screamed at him to disengage, but his pride kept him locked in place. "This is getting out of hand," he announced. "I have a meeting in Phoenix that I cannot miss. Can we please resolve this seating situation so we can take off?" "The seating situation is resolved," Zara said, still streaming. "We're in our assigned seats with valid boarding passes and proper identification. The only thing preventing takeoff is the insistence that we prove we deserve to be here." Dr. Chen stood up, her medical bag in hand. "As a physician, I'm required to report when I witness behavior that could constitute harassment or discrimination. Jennifer, I'm going to need your full name and employee identification number for my incident report." "You can't. This isn't a medical situation," Jennifer stammered. "This is a hostile environment situation that's affecting passenger welfare," Dr. Chen replied calmly. "That falls under my professional obligations." Alex Rivera made his decision. He stepped forward, tablet extended toward Jennifer. "The manifest is clear. There are no irregularities. These passengers should be allowed to remain in their assigned seats without further questioning." Jennifer looked around the cabin, suddenly aware that she had no allies left. Every face was either hostile or carefully neutral. The recording devices were multiplying. The situation had escalated far beyond her ability to control. But instead of backing down, her defensive instincts hardened into stubborn authority. "Fine," she said, her voice gaining an edge of desperation. "Since you all seem to think you know better than airline procedures, let me make this official. I'm calling the captain." Maya and Zara exchanged glances. They both recognized that moment in a negotiation when the other party makes a decision that will determine the outcome of the entire conflict. Jennifer Walsh had just chosen escalation over de-escalation. The consequences of that choice were about to become very public, very permanent, and very expensive for everyone involved. Maya's tablet chimed with an incoming priority message from Reynolds Digital Headquarters. "Escalation protocols activated. Legal team notified. Discrimination incident logged with federal authorities. Stand by for executive intervention." The flight still hadn't left the gate, but Jennifer Walsh's career was about to reach its final destination. Captain Tom Bradley had been flying commercial aircraft for 18 years, and in that time he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when a routine flight was about to become anything but routine. The call from his senior flight attendant requesting his presence in the cabin before takeoff triggered every one of those instincts. He emerged from the cockpit to find first class in a state of suspended animation, passengers frozen mid-conversation, phones discreetly recording tension so thick it seemed to alter the cabin pressure. At the center of it all, two young black women sat calmly in seats 1A and 1B, while his senior attendant stood over them with the rigid posture of someone whose authority had been challenged. Jennifer Bradley said quietly, "What seems to be the problem?" Jennifer straightened, grateful for the arrival of ultimate authority. "Captain, we have passengers in first class who are refusing to cooperate with standard verification procedures. There appear to be irregularities with their seating assignments." Bradley glanced at Maya and Zara, taking in their professional attire, their calm demeanor, the way they held themselves with quiet confidence rather than defensive aggression. He'd seen enough passenger disputes to recognize the difference between people causing problems and people having problems caused for them. "What specific irregularities?" he asked. Jennifer's tablet trembled slightly in her hands. "These passengers booked first class without elite status, without corporate codes, and they don't appear to be the typical demographic for premium seating." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Captain Bradley felt his stomach drop as he realized his senior attendant had just articulated discriminatory profiling in front of a cabin full of witnesses, several of whom were obviously recording the interaction. Maya looked up at the captain, her voice maintaining the professional tone she'd use in any business meeting. "Captain Bradley, I'm Maya Reynolds, and this is my sister Zara. We booked these seats 3 weeks ago, paid in full, and have provided all required documentation. The only irregularity appears to be that we don't match someone's preconceptions about who belongs in first class." Bradley had been hoping for a simple resolution, a booking error, a system glitch, something technical he could fix, with a quick call to operations. Instead, he was staring at what appeared to be textbook discrimination, playing out in real time on his aircraft. "May I see your boarding passes?" he asked, gently. Maya handed over both passes without hesitation. Bradley examined them carefully, then pulled out his own device to cross-reference the digital manifest. The information matched perfectly. No discrepancies, no irregularities, no legitimate reason for the ongoing challenge. Robert Kellerman, sensing an opportunity with the arrival of authority, stepped forward. "Captain, I specifically requested seat 1A when I booked this flight. I've been flying with this airline for 15 years, and I've never been bumped from my confirmed reservation." Bradley looked at him with the patience of someone accustomed to managing difficult passengers. "Sir, according to the manifest, you're confirmed in seat 3C. There's no record of a seat 1A reservation under your name." Robert's face reddened. "That's impossible. I specifically requested Mr. Kellerman." Dr. Chen interjected from her seat. "You've said you requested seat 1A, but requesting isn't the same as receiving. These passengers clearly have confirmed assignments for these seats." Zara's live stream had now reached 5,000 viewers, with comments flowing so rapidly she could barely read them. Viewers were sharing their own experiences, tagging news outlets, and expressing growing outrage at what they were witnessing. "Captain?" she said, holding up her phone. "This interaction is being broadcast live to several thousand viewers who are watching an airline employee attempt to remove passengers from their assigned seats based solely on racial profiling." Bradley felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about resolving a passenger dispute anymore. This was about the airline's reputation, potential legal liability, and his own professional integrity. He'd flown with Jennifer for 3 years and had never seen behavior like this from her. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "I need you to explain to me specifically what policy or procedure requires these passengers to vacate their assigned seats." Jennifer looked around the cabin, suddenly aware that she had painted herself into a corner with no legitimate exit. "Captain, I've been doing this for 25 years. I know when something doesn't look right. Sometimes passengers find ways to access seats they shouldn't have, and we need to verify." "Based on what criteria?" Bradley interrupted. "Their appearance, their age, their race." The direct question forced Jennifer to confront what she'd been dancing around. Of course not. Race. Captain, I would never. It's about maintaining standards, about ensuring that paying customers receive the premium experience they deserve. Maya's tablet chimed with another priority alert from Reynolds Digital's monitoring systems. She glanced at the screen and saw data that would transform this confrontation from embarrassing to catastrophic for the airline. Captain Bradley. She said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used in executive presentations. I think you should know that this conversation is being monitored and analyzed by discrimination detection algorithms. The Reynolds Digital Security System has now flagged this incident as meeting 17 separate criteria for racial profiling. Bradley stared at her. Reynolds Digital. You work for Reynolds Digital. I'm VP of Client Relations, Maya replied. My sister is Director of Marketing. Reynolds Digital provides the security infrastructure, booking management, and fraud detection systems for this airline. What you're witnessing right now is being automatically logged as a discrimination incident with appropriate federal authorities. The color drained from Jennifer's face. Reynolds Digital wasn't just any tech company, they were the backbone of modern airline operations. If they flagged an incident as discriminatory, it would trigger federal investigations, corporate reviews, and potentially millions of dollars in penalties. Robert Kellerman stepped back slightly, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd walked into. I didn't know. I wasn't trying to Mr. Kellerman, Zara said, still streaming. What exactly weren't you trying to do? Support the removal of passengers from their assigned seats. Suggest that we didn't belong in first class. Express. Surprised that young black women could afford premium seating. Captain Bradley found himself in the position no airline captain ever wants to face, choosing between supporting his crew and protecting his company from a discrimination lawsuit that appeared to be documenting itself in real time. Alex Rivera, who had been watching the interaction with growing horror, finally found his voice. Captain, I've reviewed the manifest multiple times. There are no irregularities with these passengers' seating assignments. This verification request appears to be selective. Jennifer turned on him with desperation-fueled anger. Alex, you're a junior attendant. You don't understand the complexities. I understand discrimination when I see it. Alex replied, his voice shaking but determined. And I understand that I have an obligation to report it. Dr. Chen stood up again, her medical training giving her natural authority in crisis situations. Captain, as a physician, I'm required to document instances of harassment or discriminatory behavior that I witness. This situation clearly meets those criteria. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the appropriate medical boards and civil rights organizations. Bradley looked around the first-class cabin, seeing his airline's reputation circling the drain in real time. Multiple passengers were recording a live stream, was broadcasting to thousands of viewers, and a major technology vendor was automatically generating discrimination reports. Jennifer, he said quietly, I need you to step back and allow these passengers to remain in their assigned seats. This situation ends now. But Jennifer Walsh, 25 years of unchallenged authority crumbling around her, made the decision that would define the rest of her career. No, she said, her voice gaining strength from desperation. I'm the senior flight attendant, and I'm telling you that these passengers need to be verified or removed. If you won't support proper procedures, I'll handle this myself. She reached for her radio, intending to call airport security. Maya and Zara exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. They both recognized the moment when reasonable discourse ended and power dynamics took over. Maya's finger hovered over her tablet screen, ready to activate protocols that would escalate this incident from airline customer service to federal civil rights investigation. Jennifer, Maya said softly, I'm going to give you one opportunity to step back from this precipice. Once I activate the next level of our monitoring system, this becomes a federal case with corporate liability implications that will end careers and cost millions. Is your assumption about who belongs in first class worth that price? Jennifer looked at the tablet, at the calm authority in Maya's voice, at the captain's horrified expression, at the phones recording her every word. For just a moment, she hesitated. Then her hand closed around the radio, and she made the choice that would change everything. Ground security. This is Flight 847. I need immediate assistance in first class for passengers refusing to comply with crew instructions. Captain Bradley closed his eyes. Alex Rivera stepped backward. Dr. Chen pulled out her own phone to begin documenting what was about to become a textbook case of how discrimination incidents spiral into corporate disasters. And Maya Reynolds activated the Reynolds Digital Executive Intervention Protocol, sending an emergency alert directly to her father's phone with a 4-word message: "We need you now." The flight was about to become much more than a travel delay. It was about to become a case study in the cost of assumptions, the power of technology, and the moment when quiet authority meets systemic bias at 35,000 feet. The radio crackled to life in Jennifer's hand, the dispatcher's voice cutting through the cabin tension like a knife through silk. Flight 847 ground security responding. What's the nature of the disturbance? Jennifer pressed the radio close to her mouth, her voice gaining confidence from the authority she believed she was invoking. We have 2 passengers in first class refusing to comply with standard verification procedures. They're claiming assigned seating, but won't cooperate with security protocols. Maya felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes negotiations, the moment when careful diplomacy gave way to direct confrontation. Her finger moved across her tablet screen, activating Reynolds Digital's comprehensive incident documentation system. Every word, every gesture, every facial expression was now being recorded, analyzed, and prepared for legal proceedings. Jennifer Walsh, employee ID 48582. Maya said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of a courtroom. You just filed a false report with airport security. The Reynolds Digital Monitoring System has documented that we have complied with every legitimate request, provided all required documentation, and maintained professional behavior throughout this interaction. Zara's live stream had exploded past 8,000 viewers, with major news outlets beginning to pick up the feed. The comments section was a waterfall of outrage, shared experiences, and calls for accountability. Several viewers had already identified the airline, the flight number, and Jennifer's full name from publicly available crew schedules. For those just joining our live documentation of discrimination in action, Zara said, her voice maintaining the measured tone of a professional broadcaster. A flight attendant has just called security on 2 passengers sitting in their correctly assigned first-class seats. The only irregularity she's identified is that we don't match her expectations of what first-class passengers should look like. Robert Kellerman, watching the situation spiral beyond anyone's control, finally attempted damage control. Look, this has all gotten out of hand. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? Dr. Chen interrupted her medical training, giving her the ability to cut through confusion to identify core issues. Mr. Kellerman, you inserted yourself into this situation by claiming you deserved these passengers' seats. You've supported their removal based on no legitimate criteria. What exactly are you now claiming to misunderstand? Robert's face flushed deeper as he realized there was no graceful retreat from his position. I simply thought they seemed young for first class, and I had requested. You thought what? Maya asked, turning to face him directly. That young black women couldn't afford first class, that we must have made some mistake, that your 15 years of customer loyalty entitled you to seats we had purchased and occupied. The questions hit like bullets, each one exposing another layer of assumption and bias. Robert opened his mouth to protest, then closed it as he realized that every possible response would only dig him deeper into the hole he'd created. Captain Bradley watched his aircraft transform into a courtroom, his routine flight becoming a federal incident. He'd been hoping that calling security would somehow de-escalate the situation, allow cooler heads to prevail. Instead, he was watching his senior flight attendant systematically destroy the airline's reputation, one decision at a time. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "I strongly recommend you cancel that security request. This situation can still be resolved professionally." But Jennifer had crossed her own personal Rubicon. 25 years of unchallenged authority of being the final word on passenger disputes had convinced her that she was right. The passengers were wrong. The system would support her. "Captain, with respect, these passengers have been combative and uncooperative from the moment I attempted standard verification. Now they're using some kind of technology to access confidential employee information. They're clearly not who they claim to be." Maya's tablet chimed with an incoming priority message from Reynolds Digital's legal team. "Full executive response authorized. Corporate intervention imminent. Continue documentation." "Jennifer," Maya said, consulting her screen, "since you've raised questions about who we claim to be, let me provide some clarification. I'm Maya Reynolds, VP of Client Relations for Reynolds Digital Solutions. We hold a $40 million annual contract with this airline for security infrastructure booking management and fraud detection. My sister Zara is Director of Marketing for the same company." She turned the tablet screen toward Jennifer, showing her executive identification, corporate credentials, and access authorization for airline systems. "The technology I'm using isn't hacking or unauthorized access. It's the same system your airline pays us to use to detect actual fraud and discrimination." Jennifer stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process information that contradicted everything she'd assumed about the two women in seats 1A and 1B. "You can't be." "Why can't we be?" Zara asked, her live stream now capturing Jennifer's obvious shock. "Because we're too young, too black, too casually dressed for your image of tech executives." Alex Rivera stepped forward, his tablet displaying the same corporate verification information. "Jennifer, I'm looking at their Reynolds Digital executive profiles right now. These are major technology executives. We just accused our own primary vendor of seat fraud." The implications hit Captain Bradley like a physical blow. Reynolds Digital didn't just provide services to the airline, they provided critical infrastructure. If they flagged the airline as discriminatory, if they terminated their contract, if they filed federal complaints, the operational and financial damage could be catastrophic. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, his voice carefully respectful, "I apologize for this situation. There seems to have been a serious misunderstanding." "Captain Bradley?" Maya interrupted. "There's been no misunderstanding. Your senior flight attendant made assumptions based on our appearance, age, and race. When we challenged those assumptions with facts and documentation, she doubled down by calling security. This isn't confusion. This is discrimination, and it's being documented comprehensively." Dr. Chen had been quietly taking notes on her phone, creating her own incident report. "Captain, I've documented the entire interaction for my required reporting. This situation meets every legal definition of racial profiling and passenger harassment." Robert Kellerman, realizing that his business instincts had been completely overwhelmed by his personal biases, attempted one final retreat. "Perhaps I should return to my assigned seat. I think there may have been some confusion about my reservation." "Mr. Kellerman," Zara said, still streaming to her rapidly growing audience, "the confusion wasn't about your reservation. The confusion was about whether you believed black women belonged in first class. That confusion has now been documented for thousands of witnesses." Jennifer's radio crackled again. "Flight 847 ground security ETA 2 minutes. Please prepare for passenger removal assistance." Maya looked at Captain Bradley with the expression she reserved for negotiations, where the other party was about to make a decision that would cost them everything. Captain, you have approximately 90 seconds to decide whether your airline is going to forcibly remove 2 paying customers from their assigned seats based solely on racial profiling, or whether you're going to cancel that security request and begin damage control. If you choose to proceed with removal, she continued, Reynolds Digital will immediately suspend all services to your airline, file federal discrimination complaints, and pursue every legal remedy available. Your insurance costs will increase, your operational systems will be compromised, and your reputation will be permanently damaged. If you choose to cancel the security request and address this professionally, we might find a way to resolve this that doesn't result in federal investigations and corporate liability. Captain Bradley found himself in the position every airline captain dreads, making a decision, under pressure, that could determine his career, his company's future, and the lives of everyone involved. Jennifer, sensing that her authority was slipping away, made one final desperate play. Captain, you can't let passengers threaten the airline. This is exactly why we have security protocols. The only threat here, Dr. Chen interjected, is to passengers' civil rights and the airline's legal standing. Zara's livestream viewer count had crossed 12,000, with major news outlets now actively monitoring the feed. Reynolds Digital was trending on Twitter, and airline stock prices were beginning to fluctuate as investors processed the implications of a major vendor publicly documenting discrimination. Maya's tablet showed real-time alerts from Reynolds Digital's corporate monitoring system. Media attention, spiking legal teams, mobilizing executive intervention protocols fully activated. The situation had moved beyond customer service into corporate crisis management. Captain Bradley, Maya said quietly, "The security officers are probably in the jetway right now. You have about 30 seconds to make the most important decision of your professional career." Alex Rivera looked at his tablet, then at Jennifer, then at the captain. "Sir, I formally request that the security call be canceled. This is not a legitimate passenger dispute." Jennifer turned on him with fury. "Alex, you're way out of line." "No," he replied, his voice shaking but determined. "I'm exactly where I need to be. Someone needs to do the right thing." Captain Bradley reached for his radio, his hand trembling slightly as he weighed 25 years of Jennifer's service against the clear evidence of discrimination playing out before his eyes. The cabin held its breath. Phones continued recording. The live stream audience watched in real time. And somewhere over Los Angeles, Marcus Reynolds was boarding his private jet with a very clear understanding of what needed to happen next. The security officer's footsteps echoed in the jetway, growing louder with each passing second. Captain Bradley pressed the radio button and spoke the words that would determine everyone's fate. "Ground security, disregard previous request. Flight 847 no longer requires assistance." Captain Bradley's voice carried the weight of a decision that had just saved or destroyed multiple careers, depending on perspective. Jennifer Walsh stared at him in shock, her radio still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "Captain, you can't. They're threatening the airline," Jennifer began. But Bradley held up a hand for silence. Jennifer stepped back to the galley. "Now!" The authority in his voice was absolute, the tone of a man who had finally recognized the magnitude of what was unfolding in his aircraft. Jennifer retreated, her face flushed with anger and confusion, while the cabin watched her tactical withdrawal. Zara adjusted her phone angle to capture the moment, her live stream now approaching 15,000 viewers. The comments were exploding with real-time reactions, shared experiences, and growing media attention. Several major news outlets had embedded her stream on their websites, turning the cabin of Flight 847 into a live classroom on discrimination and power dynamics. "What we're witnessing," Zara said to her audience, maintaining the professional composure that had made her a successful marketing executive, "is the moment when systemic bias collides with documented accountability." For thousands of you sharing similar experiences in the comments, this is what it looks like when someone finally says no to discriminatory treatment. Maya's tablet, was a hub of activity showing real-time analysis from Reynolds Digital's monitoring systems. The artificial intelligence was processing every word, gesture, and behavioral pattern, building a comprehensive case file that would serve as evidence in federal discrimination proceedings. "Alex," she said, gesturing to the junior flight attendant, "could you provide your full name for the record? Your professional integrity in this situation deserves recognition." Alex Rivera straightened, his voice gaining strength. "Alex Rivera, junior flight attendant, employee ID 7291. I've documented this entire interaction, and I'll be filing a formal report with the company's ethics office." Dr. Chen looked up from her own documentation. "As will I with the appropriate medical and civil rights organizations. This situation represents a clear case of passenger profiling that requires official response." Robert Kellerman, trapped between his assigned seat and the first-class cabin where he'd inserted himself into the confrontation, finally spoke with something approaching humility. "I owe you both an apology. I made assumptions, wrong assumptions, and I supported treatment that was clearly inappropriate." Maya turned to face him, her expression neutral, but her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. "Mr. Kellerman, your assumptions didn't occur in a vacuum. They reflected beliefs about who belongs where, who deserves what, and whose comfort takes priority. The apology is noted, but the behavior is documented." Zara's live stream audience had begun organizing in real time. Viewers were creating hashtags, contacting news outlets, researching airline policies, and sharing their own experiences of travel discrimination. The cabin of Flight 847 had become the epicenter of a viral movement. For those asking about next steps, Zara addressed her viewers. "We're documenting everything through our company's discrimination monitoring system. This isn't just about our experience. It's about creating accountability for patterns of bias that affect thousands of travelers." Captain Bradley approached Maya's row, his demeanor respectful but concerned. "Ms. Reynolds, I want to ensure this situation is resolved appropriately. What do you need from us to move forward professionally?" Maya consulted her tablet, showing Bradley the comprehensive incident report that Reynolds Digital Systems had compiled. "Captain, the documentation is complete. We have audio analysis, behavioral pattern recognition, and witness statements. The question isn't what we need. It's what your airline plans to do to address systematic bias in passenger treatment. We'll need to conduct a full review," Bradley replied. "Retraining policy evaluation, accountability measures." "That's reactive," Maya interrupted. "We're talking about proactive solutions. Reynolds Digital has developed bias detection algorithms specifically for transportation industries. We can implement real-time monitoring that flags discriminatory patterns before they escalate to incidents like this." Alex Rivera stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Captain, I've prepared a detailed incident report with timestamps, witness statements, and policy violations. This situation could have been prevented with better training and clearer accountability measures." Jennifer Walsh watched from the galley, her 25-year career crumbling as she realized the scope of what she'd triggered. The two women she'd assumed were trying to scam their way into first class were actually executives from one of the airline's most critical vendors. Her discriminatory profiling had been documented by artificial intelligence, broadcast live to thousands of viewers and witnessed by passengers who were actively creating formal complaints. Dr. Chen stood and addressed the captain directly. "As a physician, I'm required to report this incident to multiple organizations. But I'm also required to note that your crew members' behavior created a hostile environment that could have had serious psychological and physical health implications for these passengers." The live stream comments had evolved from outrage to organization. Viewers were coordinating media contacts, sharing legal resources, and creating support networks for travelers facing similar discrimination. Zara's audience was becoming a community united around the simple principle that paying customers deserved equal treatment, regardless of their appearance. What's remarkable about this moment, Zara told her viewers, is that we have documentation, we have witnesses, and we have technology that makes accountability possible. For generations of travelers who face discrimination with no recourse, this represents a fundamental shift in power dynamics. Maya's tablet chimed with a priority alert from Reynolds Digital Headquarters, executive team en route, media response prepared, legal documentation complete. Prepare for system-wide policy implementation. She looked up at Captain Bradley. Captain, my father is Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Digital Solutions. He's currently en route to address this situation directly. I recommend you contact your executive team to prepare for discussions about systematic bias prevention and corporate accountability. Bradley's face went pale as the full implications hit him. This wasn't just a customer service failure. It was a vendor relations crisis with one of the airline's most critical partners. Miss Reynolds, I want to assure you that this situation doesn't represent our company's values. Captain Maya replied gently. Your company's values are demonstrated by your policies, training, and employee behavior. Today's incident suggests those values need examination and adjustment. Alex Rivera approached Maya and Zara. Ma'am, I want you to know that not all crew members share the attitudes you experience today. Many of us recognize discrimination when we see it and are committed to preventing it. Maya replied, your willingness to speak up in a difficult situation demonstrates the kind of integrity that should be standard in customer service. Your actions today likely prevented this situation from escalating even further. The live stream had become a real-time case study in conflict resolution, corporate accountability, and the power of documentation. Educational institutions were already reaching out through comments, requesting permission to use the footage for training purposes. Robert Kellerman, still standing awkwardly between rows, finally found the courage to address the situation directly. Ms. Reynolds, I need to acknowledge that my behavior was driven by assumptions that were both wrong and harmful. I supported discrimination based on prejudices I'm only now beginning to recognize. Zara looked at him through her camera lens. Mr. Kellerman, recognition is the first step. The question is what you do with that recognition moving forward. Jennifer Walsh remained in the galley, isolated by her choices and facing the consequences of assumptions she'd never been forced to examine. Her radio was silent now, no longer a tool of authority, but a reminder of how quickly power dynamics could shift when bias met accountability. Maya's tablet showed that the incident documentation was complete. The media response was prepared and executive intervention was imminent. What had started as a simple flight to Phoenix had become a transformative moment in airline customer service and corporate responsibility. The cabin was quiet now, not with tension, but with the weight of witnessing change in real time. Passengers understood they had been part of something significant, something that would be discussed, analyzed, and remembered long after Flight 847 reached its destination. The live stream continued documenting not just discrimination, but the moment when technology, courage, and accountability converged to create institutional change at 35,000 feet. Maya Reynolds set her tablet on the armrest between seats 1A and 1B, the screen displaying a comprehensive corporate profile that would reshape everyone's understanding of the morning's events. The Reynolds Digital Solutions logo gleamed prominently at the top, followed by executive photographs, revenue figures, and a client list that read like a Fortune 500 directory. For the record, Maya said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had made her successful in boardroom negotiations. I want to be completely transparent about who we are and what this incident represents. She gestured to her tablet screen. Reynolds Digital Solutions provides security infrastructure, booking management, and fraud detection services to over 60 major airlines, including this one. We process more than 2 million passenger transactions daily, and our discrimination monitoring algorithms have prevented hundreds of bias incidents from escalating to the level we've witnessed today. Zara adjusted her live stream angle to capture both her sister and the corporate information on the tablet. Her viewer count had surpassed 20,000, with major news outlets now actively covering the story in real time. The comments section had evolved from individual outrage to organized activism, with viewers coordinating media contacts and legal resources. What makes this situation particularly significant, Zara addressed her audience, is that we weren't just random passengers being discriminated against. We're executives from the company that provides anti-discrimination technology to prevent exactly this kind of incident. Captain Bradley stared at the tablet display, the full magnitude of the situation finally becoming clear. Reynolds Digital wasn't just any vendor, they were the technological backbone that kept modern airlines operational. Their systems processed bookings, managed security protocols, and monitored for fraud and discrimination patterns. "Ms. Reynolds," he said carefully, "I had no idea about your corporate relationship with the airline." Captain Maya replied, "That's exactly the point. Discrimination doesn't check credentials before it strikes. We were targeted because of how we looked, not because of who we are. The fact that we happen to have resources to document and respond doesn't change the fundamental injustice of the treatment." Jennifer Walsh, watching from the galley, felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she realized she'd accused the daughter of her airline's primary technology vendor of fraud. The Reynolds Digital Systems that processed her own employment records, that managed her schedule, that monitored passenger interactions for quality control, all of it was controlled by the family she'd just discriminated against. Alex Rivera approached Maya's seat, his tablet showing the comprehensive incident report he'd compiled. "Ma'am, I've documented every aspect of this interaction, including the discriminatory language, the selective enforcement of policies, and the false security report. This information will be included in my formal complaint to corporate management." Dr. Chen looked up from her own documentation. "As a medical professional, I'm required to note that the stress response I observed in both passengers was consistent with experiencing hostile treatment. The psychological impact of discrimination is well documented, and this situation created a textbook example of environmental hostility." Robert Kellerman, standing awkwardly in the aisle, finally grasped the full scope of what he'd supported. "Ms. Reynolds, I need to acknowledge that I contributed to this situation based on assumptions about age, race, and belonging that were completely unfounded. I'm a retired insurance executive. I should have recognized discriminatory patterns when I saw them." Maya turned to face him directly. "Mr. Kellerman, your professional background makes your behavior more troubling, not less. You have experience evaluating risk and making evidence-based decisions. Today, you supported discrimination based on visual assumptions rather than factual evidence." Zara's live stream audience had begun researching the broader implications of the incident. Viewers were discovering that Reynolds Digital's discrimination monitoring technology was used across multiple industries, making this a case study with applications far beyond airline travel. For those asking about systemic impact, Zara addressed her viewers. "This incident demonstrates why technological solutions to discrimination are necessary. Human bias can override policy and training, but algorithmic monitoring provides objective documentation that creates accountability." Maya's tablet chimed with another priority alert from headquarters media response team activated. "Congressional inquiry requests received. Federal agencies requesting incident data. Executive intervention 30 minutes out." She showed the alert to Captain Bradley. "Captain, this situation has escalated beyond airline customer service. Federal agencies are requesting our incident data for their discrimination databases. Your company will need to prepare for formal investigations." Bradley closed his eyes briefly, understanding that his routine flight had become a federal case study. "Ms. Reynolds, what can we do to address this appropriately? You can start by implementing comprehensive bias training. installing real-time discrimination, monitoring and creating accountability measures that prevent future incidents, Maya replied. Reynolds Digital offers complete solutions for transportation bias. Prevention. Ironically, services your airline has been paying for, but apparently not utilizing effectively. Jennifer Walsh finally approached from the galley, her professional composure completely gone. Ms. Reynolds, I didn't know. I never intended. Jennifer. Maya interrupted gently. Your intentions are less relevant than your actions. You profiled passengers based on appearance, enforced policies selectively, and filed false reports when challenged. The discrimination was systematic, not accidental. Alex Rivera stepped forward with his documentation tablet. Ma'am, I want you to know that Jennifer's behavior today doesn't represent all airline employees. Many of us recognize discrimination and are committed to preventing it. Alex Zara said, still streaming your willingness to document this incident and challenge inappropriate behavior demonstrates the kind of professional integrity that should be standard in customer service. Dr. Chen stood and addressed the broader cabin. As witnesses to this incident, we all have a responsibility to ensure that documented discrimination results in meaningful change, not just temporary embarrassment. Maya looked around the first-class cabin, seeing passengers who had been transformed from routine travelers into witnesses to institutional bias and corporate accountability. Her tablet showed that the Reynolds Digital Monitoring System had created a comprehensive case file that would serve as evidence in multiple federal investigations. This flight was supposed to be routine travel to a business conference, she said. Instead, it's become a demonstration of how quickly assumptions can escalate to discrimination and how technology can create accountability where human judgment fails. The cabin was quiet, but it was the quiet of understanding rather than tension. Everyone present realized they had witnessed something significant, not just an incident of bias, but the moment when documentation, courage, and corporate power combined to create systematic change. Outside the aircraft, black SUVs were pulling up to the gate, and Marcus Reynolds was preparing to transform a customer service failure into an industry-wide revolution in accountability and respect. Maya Reynolds pulled up the priority contact list on her tablet, her finger hovering over the direct number for the airline's chief executive officer. In her 5 years as VP of Client Relations, she'd never had to make this kind of call. Customer service disputes were usually resolved at much lower levels, handled through routine corporate channels with professional courtesy and systematic solutions. Today required executive intervention. Captain Bradley, she said, looking up from her screen. I need to make a call that will determine how this situation proceeds. You can choose to be part of the solution or part of the problem, but either way, accountability is coming. She dialed the number, activating the speakerphone so the entire first-class cabin could hear the conversation. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. David Morrison's office. This is Sarah. Sarah. This is Maya Reynolds from Reynolds Digital Solutions. I need to speak with Mr. Morrison immediately regarding a critical incident involving discrimination against Reynolds executives on Flight 847. There was a brief pause as the executive assistant processed the implications of a major vendor requesting emergency CEO access. Ms. Reynolds, let me connect you directly. Mr. Morrison will want to handle this personally. The hold music lasted exactly 15 seconds before the airline's CEO came on the line, his voice tense with the awareness that major corporate partnerships don't typically require emergency intervention. Maya, what's happening? David, Maya replied, using the familiarity that came from 3 years of successful business relationship. My sister and I are currently sitting on Flight 847 after being subjected to systematic racial profiling by your senior flight attendant. We've been accused of fraud, threatened with removal, and had false security reports filed against us. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Every passenger in first class could hear David Morrison processing information that could cost his airline millions of dollars in lost revenue, federal penalties, and reputation damage. Maya, please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding. David, it's being documented by our discrimination monitoring systems and broadcast live to 20,000 viewers. Your flight attendant, Jennifer Walsh, has created a textbook case of institutional bias, and it's being processed as evidence for federal civil rights investigations. Maya's tablet showed real-time analytics of the incident, impact social media engagement spiking news outlets, picking up the story, congressional staffers requesting briefing materials, and Reynolds Digital's legal team preparing comprehensive documentation for federal agencies. The Reynolds Digital discrimination detection algorithms have flagged 17 separate indicators of racial profiling. Maya continued, audio analysis confirms selective enforcement of policies. Behavioral pattern recognition shows systematic bias, and witness testimony from medical professionals supports hostile environment claims. Captain Bradley watched his career flash before his eyes as he listened to the conversation that would determine his airline's future relationship with one of their most critical vendors. The Reynolds Digital contract represented $40 million annually in essential services that would be nearly impossible to replace quickly if the relationship was terminated. Maya Morrison's voice carried the careful tone of a CEO trying to prevent corporate disaster. What do you need from us to address this appropriately? I need your senior flight attendant removed from passenger service immediately, Maya replied. I need the false security report retracted and corrected. I need comprehensive bias training implemented for all customer-facing employees. And I need real-time discrimination monitoring installed across your entire operation. Zara's livestream audience was listening to the conversation with fascination, witnessing corporate accountability playing out in real time. The comments section exploded with reactions to hearing an airline CEO being held directly responsible for employee discrimination. Additionally, Maya continued, Reynolds Digital will be conducting a comprehensive audit of discrimination patterns across your airline. If we find systematic bias, and our preliminary data suggests federal agencies will receive complete documentation for their investigations. Jennifer Walsh, listening from the galley, felt her 25-year career evaporating as she realized she'd created a corporate crisis that extended far beyond her own employment. The false security report she'd filed was now being discussed at the CEO level as potential federal evidence. Alex Rivera approached Maya's seat, his own tablet displaying comprehensive incident documentation. Ma'am, I've prepared witness statements from multiple passengers, including Dr. Chen's professional assessment of the hostile environment created by discriminatory treatment. Maya nodded toward the phone. David, multiple witnesses are documenting this incident for federal civil rights complaints. Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatrician, is filing required reports with medical and civil rights organizations. The junior flight attendant, Alex Rivera, is submitting formal ethics complaints. This isn't going away quietly. Morrison's voice was strained as the full implications became clear. Maya, I want to assure you that this behavior doesn't represent our company values. David. Maya interrupted. Your company values are demonstrated by your employee, training, your policy enforcement, and your response to discrimination complaints. Today's incident suggests those values need immediate and comprehensive revision. Robert Kellerman, still standing awkwardly in the aisle, finally found the courage to address the situation directly. Mr. Morrison, this is Robert Kellerman, passenger in 3C. I need to acknowledge that I supported and encouraged the discriminatory treatment. I made assumptions based on race and age that were completely unfounded. The phone was silent for several seconds as Morrison processed the admission of passenger complicity in the discrimination incident. Mr. Kellerman, I appreciate your honesty, but that actually makes this situation more serious from a liability perspective. Dr. Chen stood and addressed the phone directly. Mr. Morrison, this is Dr. Sarah Chen. As a physician, I'm required to document hostile environments that affect passenger welfare. This situation created measurable stress responses, consistent with experiencing racial profiling and harassment. Maya's tablet chimed with priority alerts from Reynolds Digital Headquarters Executive Response Team mobilized. Media strategy activated. Federal agencies requesting preliminary data. Congressional inquiry requests received. David Maya said this conversation is being monitored by our corporate legal team and documented for federal discrimination databases. Your response in the next few minutes will determine whether this becomes a case study in appropriate crisis management or a textbook example of inadequate corporate accountability. Captain Bradley stepped forward, recognizing that his own voice needed to be part of the official record. Mr. Morrison, this is Captain Bradley. I can confirm that the passenger's account is accurate. The discriminatory behavior was obvious and systematic, and it created a hostile environment that violated multiple company policies. Morrison's voice was carefully controlled as he made decisions that would affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars in corporate liability. Maya, I'm authorizing immediate implementation of Reynolds Digital's discrimination monitoring systems across our entire operation. Jennifer Walsh is suspended pending full investigation. The security report is retracted. And I'm personally ensuring that systematic bias training begins within 48 hours. Zara adjusted her live stream to better capture the historic moment. What our viewers are witnessing, she told her audience, is real-time corporate accountability. Technology has made it possible to document discrimination comprehensively and demand immediate systematic change. Maya looked around the first-class cabin, seeing passengers who had been transformed from routine travelers into witnesses to institutional transformation. David the Reynolds. Digital systems will monitor implementation of these changes and provide federal agencies with ongoing compliance data. This isn't just about our experience. It's about preventing discrimination for every passenger who follows. Understood, Morrison replied. Maya, I want to meet with you and Marcus personally to ensure we address this comprehensively. This incident represents a failure that requires systematic correction. That meeting will happen, Maya said. But first we need to complete this flight with appropriate dignity and respect. The damage is documented. The accountability is beginning, and the systematic changes are authorized. She ended the call and looked around the cabin. Jennifer Walsh had retreated further into the galley, her authority completely evaporated. Alex Rivera stood ready with his documentation. Dr. Chen was completing her required reporting. Robert Kellerman was processing his own complicity in the discrimination. The balance of power had shifted completely, but Maya understood that individual accountability was just the beginning. Systematic change required comprehensive solutions, federal oversight, and corporate commitment to preventing future incidents. Her tablet showed an incoming call from Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Digital Solutions, and her father. The executive intervention was about to escalate to a level that would transform the airline industry's approach to passenger discrimination. The conversation with David Morrison had established immediate accountability. The conversation with Marcus Reynolds would establish long-term systematic change. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom with an announcement that transformed the routine flight into something unprecedented. Ladies and gentlemen, we have received clearance for an unscheduled VIP boarding. Please remain in your seats. Through the first-class windows, passengers could see 3 black SUVs pulling up to the gate engines running tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. This wasn't standard airline procedure. This was corporate power making itself visible. Maya looked at her tablet showing a text message from her father boarding now. Full executive response authorized. Document everything. The jetway door opened with unusual formality, and Marcus Reynolds stepped aboard Flight 847 with the quiet authority that had built a technology empire from a garage startup to a Fortune 500 company. At 52, he carried himself with the confident calm of someone who had navigated every conceivable business crisis and emerged stronger. His gray suit was impeccably tailored, his presence commanding without being aggressive, his eyes immediately assessing the situation with the analytical mind that had revolutionized airline technology. Behind him came Elena Vasquez Reynolds Digital's chief legal officer, carrying a tablet loaded with federal discrimination statutes, corporate liability assessments, and preliminary injunction paperwork. Following her was James Chen, the company's chief technology officer, whose discrimination monitoring algorithms had documented every aspect of the morning's events. The first-class cabin fell into complete silence as passengers realized they were witnessing something beyond routine customer service. This was corporate intervention at the highest level. Marcus walked directly to his daughters, his expression neutral, but his eyes conveying the controlled fury of a father who had spent decades protecting his family from exactly this kind of treatment. Maya, Zara. His voice was quiet, respectful, acknowledging their strength in handling the situation professionally. Maya replied, standing to embrace him briefly. "We've documented everything through the corporate monitoring systems. Full incident analysis is complete." "I know," Marcus replied. "I've been reviewing the real-time data since your emergency alert. 17 discrimination indicators, systematic bias patterns, false reporting, and witness testimony from medical professionals." He looked around the cabin, his gaze settling on each person who had played a role in the morning's events. Captain Bradley approached with the careful deference of someone recognizing ultimate authority. "Mr. Reynolds, I want to assure you that we're addressing this situation comprehensively." Captain Marcus interrupted gently. "You're not addressing anything yet. You're responding to documentation that my daughters created, despite not because of your airline's policies." He gestured toward Elena Vasquez. "Our legal team has already filed preliminary reports with federal agencies. The question now is whether your airline chooses cooperation or confrontation." Zara's livestream had exploded past 30,000 viewers as news of Marcus Reynolds' arrival spread across social media. The comments section was a waterfall of recognition viewers, identifying one of the most powerful black CEOs in America, personally intervening in a discrimination incident. For those just joining, Zara addressed her audience. "You're witnessing unprecedented corporate accountability. When discrimination targets the wrong family, systematic change becomes immediate." Jennifer Walsh watched from the galley as her career imploded in real time. The senior flight attendant who had challenged two passengers she assumed were trying to scam their way into first class now faced the reality that she had discriminated against the daughters of one of the most powerful technology executives in the country. Marcus turned toward the galley, his expression remaining professionally neutral. "Jennifer Walsh, employee ID 4582. 25 years with this airline, consistently rated for customer service. No previous discrimination complaints on record." His voice carried the authority of someone accessing comprehensive databases in real time. "Until today." Jennifer stepped forward hesitantly, her professional composure completely shattered. "Mr. Reynolds, I didn't know. I never intended." Jennifer, Marcus replied. "Discrimination is never about intention. It's about impact. You profiled my daughters based on their appearance, enforced policies selectively based on race, and filed false reports when they challenged your assumptions. The Reynolds Digital Monitoring Systems have documented systematic bias that meets every federal definition of racial profiling." Dr. Chen stood and addressed Marcus directly. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatrician. I've documented this incident for required civil rights reporting. Your daughters handled systematic discrimination with remarkable professionalism and dignity." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Dr. Chen, Your witness testimony and professional documentation will be crucial for federal investigations. This incident represents institutional bias that extends beyond individual employee behavior. Robert Kellerman, still standing awkwardly between seats, finally found the courage to address the situation directly. Mr. Reynolds, I need to acknowledge my role in this situation. I supported discriminatory treatment based on assumptions about age, race, and belonging that were completely wrong. Marcus looked at him with the analytical assessment of a CEO evaluating corporate partnerships. Mr. Kellerman, your honesty is noted, but your behavior contributed to systematic discrimination against paying customers. That has consequences. Alex Rivera approached with his comprehensive incident documentation. Mr. Reynolds, I'm Alex Rivera, junior flight attendant. I've documented every aspect of this discrimination incident, and I'll be submitting formal ethics complaints to corporate management and federal agencies. Alex Marcus replied, Your professional integrity in challenging inappropriate behavior demonstrates the kind of leadership that prevents discrimination. Your documentation will be essential for systematic change. Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her tablet displaying federal civil rights statutes and corporate liability assessments. Mr. Reynolds, we have comprehensive documentation for Title VI violations, Section 1981, discrimination claims, and corporate liability under federal civil rights law. The airline's exposure is significant. Marcus nodded, then addressed Captain Bradley directly. Captain, your airline has three choices: comprehensive cooperation with federal investigations, aggressive, legal confrontation with unlimited corporate resources, or systematic implementation of discrimination, prevention technology that creates ongoing accountability. Which choice costs less and protects more passengers? He continued. Reynolds Digital offers complete bias monitoring solutions that prevent incidents like this through real-time algorithmic detection and immediate intervention protocols. James Chen stepped forward with his technology tablet. Captain, our discrimination monitoring systems have identified systematic bias patterns across your airline's operations. We can implement real-time prevention technology that flags discriminatory behavior before it escalates to incidents like this. Captain Bradley looked around the cabin, seeing his routine flight transformed into a boardroom where the future of airline customer service was being negotiated in real time. Mr. Reynolds, we want to implement whatever solutions prevent future discrimination incidents. Excellent, Marcus replied. Elena will coordinate with your legal team on federal compliance requirements. James will integrate discrimination monitoring across your operational systems. And Maya will lead the bias prevention training implementation. Zara's live stream audience was witnessing corporate power being used for systematic social change. The comments section exploded with recognition that this wasn't just individual justice, it was industry transformation happening in real time. What you're seeing, Zara told her viewers, is how technology can create accountability at scale. The same monitoring systems that detected our discrimination will now prevent it for thousands of future passengers. Marcus walked slowly through the first-class cabin, his presence transforming the space from a site of discrimination into a classroom for corporate responsibility. This aircraft represents every transportation environment where assumptions about belonging create hostile experiences for paying customers. He paused at Jennifer's position in the galley. Jennifer, you'll be participating in comprehensive bias recognition training, not as punishment, but as education. Your 25-year career can become part of the solution if you choose accountability over defensiveness. Jennifer nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, sir. I want to understand how this happened and prevent it from happening again. Marcus turned to Robert Kellerman. Mr. Kellerman, your business experience gives you influence in corporate environments. Use that influence to recognize and challenge discrimination when you see it. Robert straightened, understanding that he was being given an opportunity for redemption, rather than merely punishment. I will, Mr. Reynolds. This experience has opened my eyes to biases I didn't know I carried. Dr. Chen approached with her completed incident documentation. Mr. Reynolds, this situation demonstrates why systematic monitoring is essential. Individual training isn't enough when institutional bias is embedded in corporate culture. Exactly, Marcus replied. That's why Reynolds Digital Solutions address systematic patterns rather than individual incidents. Prevention requires algorithmic monitoring that doesn't depend on human judgment. Maya looked around the transformed cabin, seeing passengers who had been witnesses to discrimination becoming participants in systematic change. Dad, the federal agencies are requesting real-time implementation data. They want to use this incident as a case study for industry-wide bias prevention. Perfect, Marcus replied. This flight becomes the prototype for transportation discrimination monitoring. Every airline, every hotel, every rental car company. Systematic change starts here. Alex Rivera stepped forward with his final documentation. Mr. Reynolds, I want to ensure that employee protections are part of the systematic change. Staff members who report discrimination need protection from retaliation. Marcus nodded approvingly. Alex, your point is critical. The Reynolds Digital Employee Protection Protocols ensure that reporting discrimination is rewarded, not punished. Systematic change requires systematic protection for people doing the right thing. Elena Vasquez approached Captain Bradley with her legal tablet. Captain, the federal agencies require immediate implementation of bias monitoring technology. The Reynolds Digital Systems can be operational within 24 hours. Implement everything, Bradley replied. Cost is less important than preventing future discrimination incidents. James Chen activated his technology demonstration, showing real-time discrimination detection algorithms, processing the morning's events. This system would have flagged Jennifer's behavior within the first 30 seconds, prevented the false security report, and triggered immediate supervisory intervention. The first-class cabin had become a corporate laboratory where technology accountability and systematic change converged to address institutional bias. Passengers understood they were witnessing the transformation of an entire industry's approach to customer service and civil rights. Marcus looked at his daughters with the pride of a father who had raised them to handle discrimination with dignity and strength. Maya, Zara, you've transformed a discriminatory incident into systematic industry change. This is legacy. Zara adjusted her live stream for a final comment to her 35,000 viewers. What started as routine travel became a demonstration of how technology, courage, and corporate accountability can create systematic change. This flight didn't just reach its destination. It changed the journey for everyone who follows. The balance of power had shifted completely. But more importantly, the systems that enabled discrimination were being replaced with technology that prevented it. Individual accountability was important, but systematic change would protect thousands of future passengers from experiencing what Maya and Zara had endured. Marcus Reynolds had arrived not just to protect his daughters, but to transform an entire industry's approach to passenger dignity and respect. The flight was about to become the case study that revolutionized transportation civil rights enforcement. Marcus Reynolds stood in the center of the first-class cabin, his tablet displaying real-time corporate decision-making that would reshape the airline industry. With the measured authority of someone accustomed to billion-dollar negotiations, he began implementing systematic changes that would transform discrimination from an individual incident into institutional prevention. Elena, he said, addressing his chief legal officer, initiate federal cooperation protocols. Full documentation to Civil Rights Division, Transportation Department, and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Priority processing for systematic industry reform. Elena Vasquez activated her secure legal communications system. Federal agencies are requesting immediate access to our discrimination monitoring data. The Department of Transportation wants to fast-track industry-wide bias prevention requirements. Captain Bradley watched his airline transform from customer service provider to federal case study in real time. Mr. Reynolds, what does immediate implementation of your monitoring systems require from our operations? James Chen stepped forward with his technology tablet. Captain the Reynolds, digital discrimination detection algorithms integrate seamlessly with existing airline systems. We can have real-time bias monitoring operational across your entire fleet within 18 hours. Do it, Bradley replied without hesitation. Cost timeline training requirements. Implement everything necessary to prevent future discrimination incidents. Maya looked around the cabin, seeing the faces of passengers who had been transformed from routine travelers into witnesses to systematic corporate change. The federal agencies are requesting this incident as the prototype for transportation discrimination prevention. Every airline will be required to implement similar monitoring systems. Zara's live stream had become appointment viewing for corporate accountability advocates. Her audience had grown to over 40,000 viewers, with major news outlets embedding her feed, and congressional staffers monitoring the systematic changes being implemented in real time. What you're witnessing, she told her audience, is technology being used to create systematic justice. Individual discrimination incidents become industry-wide prevention protocols. Jennifer Walsh approached Marcus with the careful deference of someone whose career had been redefined by her own choices. Mr. Reynolds, I want to participate in whatever training or accountability measures will prevent future discrimination. I need to understand how my assumptions created harmful treatment. Marcus looked at her with the analytical assessment of a CEO evaluating employee rehabilitation potential. Jennifer, recognition is the beginning of change, not the completion of it. You'll be participating in comprehensive bias recognition training, not as punishment, but as education for preventing systematic discrimination. The Reynolds Digital Employee Development Program Maya added includes psychological assessment of discriminatory assumptions, pattern recognition training, and ongoing monitoring to ensure behavioral change is sustained rather than temporary. Alex Rivera stepped forward with his final incident documentation. Mr. Reynolds, I've compiled witness statements from every passenger in first class, including Dr. Chen's professional assessment and my own observations as crew. This documentation will support federal investigations and training program development. Marcus nodded approvingly. Alex, your professional integrity in documenting and challenging discrimination demonstrates leadership that should be standard in customer service. You'll be part of our bias prevention training development team. Dr. Chen approached with her completed civil rights reporting. Mr. Reynolds, the medical documentation of stress responses and hostile environment creation will support federal civil rights investigations. This incident represents textbook institutional bias that requires systematic correction. Dr. Chen. Marcus replied, your professional witness testimony provides credibility for federal agencies implementing industry-wide discrimination prevention. This incident becomes the medical evidence for why bias monitoring is essential for passenger welfare. Robert Kellerman stood and addressed the cabin with the humility of someone confronting his own complicity in discrimination. Mr. Reynolds, I need to acknowledge that my business background makes my discriminatory assumptions more troubling, not less. I have corporate influence that I should use to recognize and challenge bias, rather than supporting it. Marcus assessed him with the strategic thinking of someone building corporate coalitions. Mr. Kellerman, your acknowledgement of discriminatory behavior creates accountability, but your future actions in corporate environments will determine whether that accountability becomes meaningful change. Elena Vasquez activated her secure legal communications. The federal agencies are requesting immediate access to systematic bias documentation across the airline industry. The Reynolds digital databases contain comprehensive discrimination patterns that support industry-wide reform requirements. Excellent, Marcus replied. This incident becomes the evidence for federal regulations requiring real-time bias monitoring across all transportation industries. James Chen demonstrated his discrimination detection algorithms for Captain Bradley. The technology flags discriminatory language, selective policy enforcement, and systematic bias patterns within 30 seconds of occurrence. Supervisory intervention prevents escalation to the level you witness today. The system learns from every incident Maya added, creating increasingly sophisticated detection capabilities. Discrimination patterns that took years to document manually are now identified and prevented in real time. Zara addressed her live stream audience with the authority of someone who had transformed personal discrimination into systematic change. For those asking about long-term impact, this incident establishes legal precedent for technology-based discrimination prevention. Every transportation company will be required to implement similar monitoring systems. The first-class cabin had become a corporate laboratory where individual accountability merged with systematic prevention. Passengers understood they were witnessing the moment when technology, legal authority, and corporate power converged to address institutional bias comprehensively. Marcus looked around the transformed cabin, seeing the faces of people who would remember this flight as the moment when routine discrimination became unacceptable corporate liability. This aircraft represents every environment where assumptions about belonging create hostile experiences. Today, those assumptions meet technological accountability. Captain Bradley approached with his operational tablet. Mr. Reynolds, I'm authorizing immediate implementation of comprehensive bias prevention protocols. Training, monitoring, accountability measures, everything necessary to ensure this never happens again. Captain Marcus replied, Your authorization begins systematic change that extends beyond your airline. Federal agencies will use this implementation as the model for industry-wide requirements. Alex Rivera stood with his comprehensive documentation. Mr. Reynolds, the witness statements and incident analysis provide complete evidence for federal civil rights investigations. This documentation will support systematic reform across the transportation industry. Marcus nodded. Alex, your professional integrity in challenging discrimination creates the foundation for institutional change. Individual courage enables systematic transformation. Jennifer Walsh approached with visible emotion. Mr. Reynolds, I want your daughters to know that this experience has forced me to confront assumptions I didn't know I was making. I'm committed to being part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. Maya looked at her with the composed authority that had handled discrimination with professional dignity. Jennifer, accountability requires sustained behavioral change, not momentary recognition. The Reynolds digital monitoring systems will track whether your commitment translates into consistent, respectful treatment of all passengers. Dr. Chen completed her federal reporting requirements. The medical documentation establishes that discrimination creates measurable harm to passenger welfare. This evidence supports federal requirements for systematic bias prevention in transportation environments. Marcus activated his secure communications with Reynolds Digital Headquarters. Corporate Response Team, implement full systematic change protocols. Federal agencies are requesting industry-wide bias prevention technology based on this incident. Timeline is immediate. The cabin was quiet, with the weight of systematic transformation rather than individual conflict. Passengers realized they had witnessed technology being used to create institutional justice, corporate power, being exercised for civil rights enforcement and individual discrimination, becoming the catalyst for industry-wide change. Zara concluded her live stream with a message that would be shared across social media platforms. This flight demonstrated that discrimination can be documented, challenged, and prevented through technology, courage, and accountability. Individual incidents become systematic solutions when corporate power is used responsibly. The immediate consequences were comprehensive. Jennifer Walsh suspended, pending bias, training completion, systematic monitoring, implemented across airline operations, federal agencies, provided complete discrimination, documentation, and industry-wide prevention technology authorized for immediate deployment. But the long-term consequences would be transformative. An entire industry required to implement real-time bias monitoring federal regulations, mandating discrimination, prevention technology, and corporate accountability systems that made passenger profiling operationally impossible, rather than merely prohibited. Flight 847 had become the case study that revolutionized transportation, civil rights, transforming individual discrimination into systematic justice through technology, courage, and comprehensive corporate accountability. Within 6 hours of Marcus Reynolds stepping aboard Flight 847, the Reynolds Digital Corporate Headquarters in Silicon Valley had transformed into a crisis response center that would reshape the airline industry. The executive conference room buzzed with activity as teams of engineers, legal experts, and policy analysts worked to convert a discrimination incident into systematic industry reform. Elena Vasquez stood before a wall of monitors, displaying real-time federal agency responses, congressional inquiry requests, and media coverage analytics. The Department of Transportation has fast-tracked industry-wide bias prevention requirements, she announced to the emergency response team. They want Reynolds Digital's discrimination monitoring technology implemented as federal standard across all major airlines within 90 days. James Chen pulled up comprehensive system architecture on the main display screen. The Reynolds Protocol. That's what they're calling our discrimination detection algorithms, processes. Passenger interactions in real time flagging bias indicators within 30 seconds of occurrence. We can have baseline systems operational industry-wide within 60 days. The technology that had documented Maya and Zara's discrimination was now being scaled to monitor millions of passenger interactions daily across hundreds of airlines. What started as corporate customer service was becoming federal civil rights enforcement through artificial intelligence. Dr. Lisa Park Reynolds, Digital's chief data officer, activated demographic analysis displays showing systematic bias patterns across the transportation industry. Our existing airline partnerships have been monitoring discrimination incidents for 3 years. The data reveals systematic profiling affecting over 200,000 passengers annually, patterns that human oversight missed, but algorithmic detection identifies consistently. The numbers were staggering. Racial profiling in seat assignments, selective enforcement of carry-on policies, disproportionate security screenings, biased customer service responses, all documented through the same monitoring systems that had captured Jennifer Walsh's discriminatory behavior in real time. Marcus Reynolds joined the emergency response team via secure video conference from Flight 847, his image appearing on screens throughout the corporate headquarters. The federal agencies want comprehensive industry reform, not just individual accountability. We're implementing systematic change that makes discrimination operationally impossible rather than merely prohibited. The Reynolds Protocol incorporated machine learning algorithms that analyzed language patterns, behavioral indicators, policy enforcement consistency, and demographic disparities in customer treatment. The system learned from every interaction, becoming increasingly sophisticated at detecting subtle bias that human supervisors might miss or ignore. The beauty of algorithmic monitoring, explained Dr. Park, is that it doesn't depend on human judgment, which can be compromised by the same biases it's supposed to detect. The system flags discriminatory patterns, regardless of intent, focusing on impact rather than motivation. Sarah Kim Reynolds, Digital's Director of Corporate Partnerships, activated client communication systems. We're coordinating simultaneous implementation across 47 major airlines. The federal timeline requires operational bias monitoring within 90 days, comprehensive training within 6 months, and full accountability systems within 1 year. The scope was unprecedented. Every major airline would be required to implement real-time discrimination monitoring with federal oversight, ensuring compliance and standardized reporting requirements. The cost would be substantial, but the legal liability of continued discrimination would be catastrophic. Elena Vasquez pulled up federal regulatory frameworks on her display. The Civil Rights Division is using our incident documentation as evidence for expanded transportation discrimination enforcement. They're requesting real-time access to bias monitoring data for pattern analysis and investigation prioritization. The transformation extended beyond individual airlines to systematic industry accountability. Federal agencies would have direct access to discrimination monitoring data, enabling proactive civil rights enforcement rather than reactive complaint processing. James Chen demonstrated the user interface that would revolutionize customer service training. Airline employees will receive real-time feedback on potentially discriminatory behavior. The system provides immediate coaching rather than post-incident discipline, preventing bias from escalating to federal violations. The technology created a feedback loop where discriminatory assumptions were identified and corrected before they affected passenger treatment. Instead of relying on customer complaints or supervisor observations, the system provided continuous monitoring and immediate intervention. Marcus addressed his emergency response team from the aircraft cabin. This incident represents the intersection of technology and civil rights enforcement. We're proving that systematic bias can be prevented through comprehensive monitoring and immediate accountability. The Reynolds Protocol would analyze not just obvious discrimination, but subtle patterns that created hostile environments for minority passengers. Longer security screenings, more frequent bag checks, selective policy enforcement, biased seating assignments, all would be detected and prevented through algorithmic monitoring. Dr. Park activated predictive analytics displays. The system identifies bias indicators before they become discrimination incidents. Language patterns, interaction duration, policy, application consistency. We can prevent discriminatory treatment rather than just documenting it after the fact. The federal agencies were requesting not just monitoring technology, but comprehensive bias prevention education. Reynolds Digital was developing virtual reality training systems that allowed employees to experience discrimination from the passenger perspective, creating empathy-based learning that traditional diversity training often failed to achieve. Elena Vasquez coordinated with congressional staffers requesting briefing materials. 3 congressional committees are scheduling hearings on transportation discrimination. They want our incident data and systematic prevention technology as evidence for federal legislation requiring bias monitoring across all customer service industries. The transformation was expanding beyond transportation to hospitality, retail healthcare, and financial services. The Reynolds Protocol demonstrated how artificial intelligence could create accountability at scale, making systematic discrimination operationally difficult rather than just legally prohibited. Sarah Kim activated partnership implementation timelines. The airlines are requesting accelerated deployment despite the cost. They understand that discrimination liability exceeds technology investment, especially with federal agencies now requiring comprehensive bias prevention. The business case was compelling. Discrimination lawsuits cost airlines millions annually in settlements, legal fees, and reputation damage. The Reynolds Protocol offered prevention rather than reaction, systematic accountability rather than individual discipline. Marcus concluded the emergency response briefing with strategic direction. This flight doesn't end when we land in Phoenix. It begins systematic transformation that makes discrimination impossible through technology accountability and comprehensive federal enforcement. The monitors throughout Reynolds Digital headquarters showed real-time implementation progress. Federal agencies, processing documentation, congressional committees, scheduling hearings, airline partnerships, deploying monitoring systems, and media coverage, spreading awareness of technological solutions to systematic bias. What started as a family trip to Phoenix had become a case study in how technology could create civil rights enforcement at scale. The Reynolds Protocol would monitor millions of passenger interactions, prevent thousands of discrimination incidents, and transform an entire industry's approach to customer dignity and respect. The digital revolution in civil rights enforcement was beginning, and it started at 35,000 feet, with two young women refusing to give up seats they had rightfully purchased. The media explosion began while Flight 847 was still on the tarmac. Zara's live stream had reached 50,000 concurrent viewers, but the real amplification came from the strategic sharing by civil rights organizations, technology news outlets, and congressional social media accounts. Within 2 hours, Reynolds Protocol was trending nationally, transforming a customer service incident into a defining moment for corporate accountability. CNN's breaking news banner read, "Tech CEO intervenes in real-time discrimination incident." Fox Business led with Reynolds Digital stock surges on civil rights technology innovation. MSNBC focused on airline bias, caught on live stream. Federal agencies respond. The story had everything that drove viral engagement: clear documentation of discrimination, immediate corporate accountability, technology, providing solutions, and systematic change being implemented in real time. More importantly, it offered hope that individual incidents could create institutional transformation. At Reynolds Digital's Media Response Center, Communications Director Rachel Torres coordinated with a crisis management team that had quickly pivoted from damage control to strategic messaging. "We're not defending against negative coverage," she announced to her team. "We're amplifying a story about technology creating civil rights solutions." The media strategy was sophisticated. Rather than minimizing the discrimination incident or focusing on individual apologies, Reynolds Digital was positioning the story as a demonstration of how artificial intelligence could create systematic bias prevention. The company's stock price reflected investor confidence in technology-based solutions to social problems. Major news outlets were requesting interviews with Marcus Reynolds, but the CEO was deliberately limiting media access to focus on systematic implementation rather than individual celebrity. "The story isn't about one family's experience," he told his communications team via secure conference from the aircraft. "The story is about preventing discrimination for every family that follows." The airline industry's response was swift and strategic. Competing airlines began announcing their own bias prevention initiatives, partnerships with diversity consultants, and accelerated implementation of monitoring technology. No executive wanted their company to become the next case study in systematic discrimination. David Morrison, the airline CEO, who had taken Maya's emergency call, was conducting damage control interviews while simultaneously announcing comprehensive bias prevention initiatives. "This incident represents a failure of training and accountability that we're addressing systematically," he told reporters. "We're implementing Reynolds Digital's discrimination monitoring technology across our entire operation within 60 days. The federal response was equally rapid. Transportation Secretary Patricia Martinez issued a statement praising innovative technology solutions that create proactive civil rights enforcement rather than reactive complaint processing. The Department of Justice announced expedited review of transportation discrimination patterns with Reynolds Digital's data, providing evidence for systematic reform requirements. Congressional staffers were scheduling hearings on technology-based bias prevention, requesting testimony from Reynolds Digital executives and civil rights organizations. The incident had created bipartisan support for federal legislation requiring discrimination monitoring across customer service industries. Social media engagement was driving policy discussions in real time. Twitter threads analyzed the legal implications, LinkedIn posts discussed corporate accountability strategies, and TikTok videos explained artificial intelligence bias detection for younger audiences. The story was reaching every demographic and political constituency simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatrician who had witnessed and documented the discrimination, was providing medical perspective in interviews with healthcare news outlets. Discrimination creates measurable stress responses that affect physical and psychological health, she explained to Medical News Today. Systematic prevention is a public health issue, not just a civil rights concern. The business media focused on the technology and implementation aspects. Fortune magazine's headline read, "How AI Can Prevent Workplace Discrimination Before It Happens." Harvard Business Review requested analysis of corporate accountability through real-time monitoring. The Wall Street Journal examined investor response to discrimination prevention technology. International coverage positioned the Reynolds Protocol as American innovation in civil rights enforcement. The BBC highlighted systematic bias prevention as a model for global transportation industries. Deutsche Welle analyzed artificial intelligence applications for social justice. The story was becoming a case study in how technology could address institutional discrimination worldwide. Alex Rivera, the junior flight attendant who had documented the incident and challenged discriminatory behavior, was receiving interview requests from airline industry publications. His story demonstrated how individual integrity could catalyze systematic change, providing hope for employees facing similar ethical dilemmas. The social media response extended beyond individual outrage to organized activism. Civil rights organizations were using the incident to promote comprehensive bias prevention legislation. Technology advocacy groups highlighted artificial intelligence applications for social justice. Employee rights organizations shared resources for reporting workplace discrimination. Jennifer Walsh, the flight attendant, whose discriminatory behavior had triggered the systematic response, was not participating in media interviews. Her statement released through the airline's corporate communications focused on accepting responsibility and participating in comprehensive bias recognition training. "I'm committed to understanding how my assumptions created harmful treatment and preventing similar incidents through education and accountability." Robert Kellerman, the passenger whose assumptions had supported the discriminatory treatment, was also avoiding media attention. His statement acknowledged complicity in bias and committed to using his corporate influence to recognize and challenge discrimination in business environments. The airline industry associations were coordinating unified responses that emphasized proactive bias prevention rather than reactive damage control. The Airlines for America Trade Organization announced industry-wide discrimination, monitoring standards, accelerated diversity training requirements, and federal cooperation on systematic bias prevention. Academic institutions were requesting access to the incident documentation for case study development. Business schools wanted to analyze corporate crisis management and systematic accountability. Law schools were examining civil rights enforcement through technology. Sociology programs were studying institutional bias and algorithmic prevention. The incident was becoming required reading in corporate training programs across multiple industries. The comprehensive documentation provided perfect case study material for bias recognition, ethical decision-making, and systematic accountability implementation. Technology companies were analyzing the Reynolds Protocol for applications beyond transportation. Hotel chains were requesting discrimination monitoring for guest services. Retail corporations wanted bias detection for customer interactions. Healthcare systems were exploring systematic prevention for patient treatment disparities. The media coverage was driving policy discussions in corporate boardrooms, federal agencies, and academic institutions simultaneously. The story offered concrete solutions to abstract problems demonstrating how technology could create accountability at scale rather than depending on individual integrity or supervisor oversight. Marcus Reynolds' strategic decision to limit personal media access was directing attention towards systematic solutions rather than individual celebrity. The focus remained on preventing future discrimination rather than relitigating past incidents, creating forward momentum for institutional change rather than backward-looking blame assignment. The media storm was transforming a customer service failure into a technology innovation success story, systematic discrimination into algorithmic prevention, and individual accountability into institutional transformation. The story would continue evolving, but the foundation was established. Technology could create civil rights enforcement at scale, making discrimination operationally difficult rather than just legally prohibited. 3 weeks after Flight 847 became national news, Jennifer Walsh sat in a small conference room at the Reynolds Digital Training Facility in Mountain View, California. The woman who had spent 25 years as a senior flight attendant was now student number 12 in a comprehensive bias recognition program that would determine whether her airline career could be salvaged or should be terminated. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being trained by the same company whose executives she had discriminated against using technology that had documented her biased behavior in real time. The Reynolds Digital Bias Prevention Program didn't focus on shame or punishment, but on psychological understanding of how discriminatory assumptions developed and could be corrected. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, the program's director and a former UCLA psychology professor, facilitated sessions that used virtual reality experiences to help participants understand discrimination from the recipient's perspective. Jennifer found herself experiencing airline travel as a young Black woman, feeling the weight of suspicious glances, selective questioning, and subtle hostility that she had never noticed from her position of authority. The goal isn't to make you feel guilty, Dr. Rodriguez explained during Jennifer's individual counseling session. The goal is to help you recognize bias patterns so you can choose different responses. Your 25-year career demonstrates professional competence. The discrimination incident demonstrates unconscious bias that can be corrected through awareness and practice. Jennifer's rehabilitation was being monitored through the same algorithmic systems that had detected her original discriminatory behavior. Her language patterns, interaction styles, and policy enforcement decisions were analyzed for bias indicators, providing real-time feedback that traditional diversity training couldn't offer. "I keep thinking about those two women," Jennifer confided to Dr. Rodriguez. "How composed they were, how professionally they handled my assumptions, how they turned discrimination into systematic change. I was trying to protect first-class standards, but I was really protecting my own biases." The program included sessions with former discrimination targets who shared their experiences and perspectives. Jennifer met airline passengers who had been profiled, questioned, and challenged based on appearance rather than documentation. The personal stories made abstract bias concepts concrete and urgent. Meanwhile, Robert Kellerman was undergoing his own reckoning in his retirement community outside Phoenix. The former insurance executive who had supported discriminatory treatment based on his 15 years of customer loyalty was now the subject of local news coverage and social media criticism that had followed him home. His neighbor Maria Santos, a retired civil rights lawyer, had approached him directly about the incident after seeing the news coverage. "Robert, I've known you for 3 years. You're not an obviously racist person, but your behavior on that flight was textbook discrimination. How do you reconcile those two facts?" The question forced Robert to confront the difference between overt hatred and unconscious bias. He wasn't burning crosses or using racial slurs, but he had assumed that young Black women didn't belong in first-class seats he believed he deserved. His assumptions had been subtle, but systematic, polite, but harmful. Robert began attending bias recognition workshops at the local community center, participating in discussions about privilege assumption and institutional discrimination. The sessions were uncomfortable, but illuminating, helping him understand how his business success and social position had insulated him from recognizing discriminatory patterns he unconsciously supported. I spent 40 years evaluating insurance risks based on statistical analysis and demographic patterns, he reflected during one group session. But when it came to those two women on the plane, I made assumptions based on stereotypes rather than evidence. I violated every principle of analytical thinking that made me successful in business. His wife Judith had been observing his transformation with a mixture of support and frustration. "Robert, you've always prided yourself on being fair and analytical. But fairness requires recognizing when your assumptions are wrong, not just defending them more cleverly." Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatrician who had witnessed and documented the discrimination, was using her experience to develop medical protocols for recognizing and addressing bias in healthcare settings. Her testimony before the Transportation Department had been so compelling that the Department of Health and Human Services requested her expertise for systematic bias prevention in medical environments. "Discrimination in healthcare can be life-threatening," she explained to a conference of hospital administrators. The same assumption-making that led to passenger profiling leads to inadequate medical care for minority patients. The Reynolds Protocol demonstrates how real-time monitoring can prevent bias before it affects treatment quality. Her medical practice was implementing bias detection technology, adapted from the airline monitoring systems, analyzing patient interaction patterns, treatment recommendations, and care quality metrics for discriminatory disparities. The technology was revealing subtle bias patterns that traditional quality assurance programs had missed. Alex Rivera, the junior flight attendant whose integrity had challenged discriminatory behavior, was now leading bias prevention training for airline employees nationwide. His story demonstrated how individual courage could catalyze systematic change, inspiring other customer service workers to recognize and report discriminatory treatment. The hardest part wasn't challenging Jennifer's behavior, he told a group of flight attendants during a training session. "The hardest part was recognizing that my silence would have made me complicit in discrimination." Individual integrity enables systematic accountability. His career had been transformed by his ethical decision-making during the incident. Instead of facing retaliation for challenging a senior colleague, he had been promoted to corporate training leadership and was developing bias prevention protocols for implementation across the airline industry. The personal reckonings were creating ripple effects throughout the airline industry and beyond. Jennifer's rehabilitation was being documented as a case study in bias correction through technology and psychological intervention. Robert's community involvement was demonstrating how discrimination recognition could lead to productive activism rather than defensive denial. Dr. Chen's medical applications were expanding bias prevention beyond transportation to healthcare, creating systematic accountability that protected patient welfare. Alex's leadership was inspiring employee integrity across customer service industries. But the most significant personal reckoning was happening within Maya and Zara Reynolds themselves. The sisters who had transformed discrimination into systematic change were processing the psychological impact of becoming public symbols for civil rights enforcement through technology. "We never intended to become representatives for airline discrimination," Maya reflected during a family dinner 3 weeks after the incident. "We just refused to give up seats we had rightfully purchased." But somehow, that refusal became a catalyst for industry transformation. Zara, whose live stream had documented the incident for federal agencies and global audiences, was receiving speaking requests from civil rights organizations, technology conferences, and academic institutions. The live stream was instinctive documentation, not strategic activism. But the response demonstrated how technology can create accountability when traditional complaint systems fail. Marcus Reynolds watched his daughters process their transformation from private executives to public civil rights advocates with the protective concern of a father and the strategic thinking of a CEO. You handled discrimination with dignity and strength, documented it comprehensively, and created systematic solutions. That's leadership. The personal reckonings were demonstrating that discrimination affected everyone involved. Perpetrators who needed to confront unconscious bias, bystanders who needed to choose between complicity and courage, witnesses who needed to decide between silence and advocacy, and targets who needed to transform personal injury into systematic justice. The Reynolds family had chosen transformation over victimization, systematic change over individual revenge, and comprehensive solutions over temporary satisfaction. Their personal reckoning had become a public lesson in how technology, courage, and accountability could create institutional change at scale. The individual stories were becoming universal lessons, demonstrating how personal growth could enable systematic transformation when supported by technology, legal authority, and corporate commitment to bias prevention rather than mere diversity promotion. The congressional hearing room was packed beyond capacity as Transportation Subcommittee Chair Representative Lisa Johnson gavelled the session to order. The hearing title, Technology Solutions for Transportation, Discrimination Prevention, had drawn civil rights advocates, airline executives, technology leaders, and federal agency representatives to examine how artificial intelligence could create systematic bias prevention at scale. Maya Reynolds sat at the witness table, her testimony folder containing 6 months of comprehensive data from the Reynolds Protocol implementation across 47 major airlines. The discrimination monitoring technology that had documented her family's experience was now preventing thousands of bias incidents monthly, creating the largest systematic civil rights enforcement program in transportation history. Ms. Reynolds, Representative Johnson began. Your testimony indicates that algorithmic bias detection has reduced documented discrimination incidents by 89% across participating airlines. Can you explain how technology creates more effective civil rights enforcement than traditional complaint-based systems? Maya activated her presentation display, showing real-time discrimination prevention statistics from the past 6 months. Representative Johnson, traditional civil rights enforcement depends on victims filing complaints after experiencing discrimination. The Reynolds Protocol prevents discriminatory treatment before it affects passengers using artificial intelligence to flag bias indicators within 30 seconds of occurrence. The data was compelling. Over 200,000 potential discrimination incidents had been prevented through real-time monitoring and immediate intervention. Customer service representatives received instant coaching when bias indicators were detected, preventing discriminatory assumptions from escalating to federal violations. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, now Director of Bias Prevention for the Department of Transportation, provided federal oversight perspective. The Reynolds Protocol has transformed civil rights enforcement from reactive complaint processing to proactive discrimination prevention. Federal agencies now have real-time access to bias monitoring data, enabling systematic pattern analysis rather than individual incident response. The transformation extended beyond individual airlines to industry-wide accountability. Federal aviation regulations now required real-time bias monitoring for all major carriers, with standardized reporting requirements that enabled pattern analysis across the entire transportation sector. Jennifer Walsh, completing her 6th month of comprehensive bias recognition training, was testifying about rehabilitation through technology-assisted bias correction. The Reynolds Protocol didn't just document my discriminatory behavior. It helped me understand how unconscious assumptions created harmful treatment. The real-time feedback system prevents bias from affecting passenger interactions. Her testimony was powerful because it demonstrated that discrimination could be corrected through awareness and accountability rather than termination and shame. The technology created learning opportunities rather than just punishment consequences. Representative Maria Santos, the ranking minority member, questioned airline industry compliance and cost-effectiveness. Mr. Morrison, as CEO of the airline, involved in the original incident. Can you explain the business case for comprehensive bias? Monitoring technology. David Morrison, the airline CEO, who had authorized immediate Reynolds protocol implementation, provided corporate perspective. Representative Santos' discrimination liability was costing our industry over $400 million annually in settlements, legal fees, and reputation damage. The Reynolds Protocol prevents discrimination incidents rather than just documenting them after they occur, creating substantial cost savings through systematic prevention. The business case was convincing. Discrimination prevention was significantly less expensive than discrimination litigation, especially when technology enabled real-time intervention rather than post-incident damage control. Alex Rivera, now National Director of Bias Prevention Training for the airline industry, testified about employee response to algorithmic monitoring. The technology doesn't replace human judgment. It enhances ethical decision-making by providing immediate feedback when bias indicators are detected. Employees appreciate coaching that prevents mistakes rather than punishment that follows them. The hearing room included observers whose lives had been transformed by systematic bias prevention. Passengers who had experienced respectful treatment instead of discriminatory profiling, employees who had learned to recognize and correct unconscious assumptions, and families who traveled without fear of humiliation based on appearance. Dr. Sarah Chen, whose medical documentation had supported federal discrimination investigations, provided healthcare perspective on systematic bias prevention. The Reynolds Protocol has been adapted for medical environments where discrimination can be life-threatening. Artificial intelligence monitors patient interaction patterns, treatment recommendations, and care quality for bias indicators, preventing discriminatory assumptions from affecting healthcare delivery. The technology applications were expanding beyond transportation to healthcare, financial services, retail, hospitality, and education. Systematic bias prevention was becoming standard operating procedure for customer service industries where discriminatory treatment created legal liability and reputation damage. Robert Kellerman, now volunteering with civil rights organizations in Phoenix, submitted written testimony about personal transformation through bias recognition. My assumptions on Flight 847 were wrong and harmful, but they represented unconscious patterns that many business professionals carry without examination. Technology that flags discriminatory assumptions creates opportunities for growth rather than just consequences for mistakes. His rehabilitation demonstrated that discrimination could be addressed through education and accountability rather than ostracism and permanent stigmatization. The technology created learning environments that encouraged honest examination of bias rather than defensive denial. Marcus Reynolds concluded the witness testimony with strategic perspective on systematic bias prevention through artificial intelligence. Representatives, the Reynolds Protocol demonstrates that technology can create civil rights enforcement at scale, making discrimination operationally difficult rather than just legally prohibited. Systematic prevention protects everyone, passengers from discriminatory treatment, employees from unconscious bias, mistakes, and corporations from legal liability. The congressional testimony was being broadcast live, reaching millions of viewers who were learning about technology solutions to systematic discrimination. The hearing had become educational programming about artificial intelligence applications for social justice. Representative Johnson summarized the hearing themes. The testimony indicates that algorithmic bias detection creates more effective civil rights enforcement than traditional complaint-based systems, while providing cost-effective discrimination prevention for businesses and comprehensive protection for consumers. The federal response was immediate. The Department of Transportation announced accelerated requirements for bias monitoring technology across all transportation industries. The Department of Justice requested similar technology for systematic discrimination prevention in federal contractor compliance. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission began developing algorithmic bias detection for workplace discrimination prevention. Maya looked around the hearing room, seeing faces of people whose lives had been improved by technology that prevented discriminatory treatment rather than just documenting it after the fact. The 6 months since Flight 847 had demonstrated that systematic change was possible when individual courage met technological innovation and corporate accountability. Zara, monitoring social media response to the congressional hearing from her corporate communications office, watched real-time engagement that showed public support for systematic bias prevention. Reynolds' protocol was trending again, but this time the focus was on prevention success rather than discrimination documentation. The hearing concluded with bipartisan support for federal legislation requiring bias monitoring technology across all customer service industries. The Reynolds Protocol had become the model for systematic discrimination prevention, proving that artificial intelligence could create civil rights enforcement at scale. 6 months after 2 sisters refused to give up airplane seats they had rightfully purchased, their experience had transformed into federal policy that protected millions of consumers from discriminatory treatment. Individual courage had become systematic justice through technology accountability and comprehensive federal enforcement. The long-term impact was becoming clear. Discrimination was evolving from acceptable risk to operational impossibility through real-time monitoring, immediate intervention, and systematic prevention that made bias too expensive and too visible for corporate tolerance. 1 year after Flight 847 became a catalyst for systematic transformation, the Reynolds family gathered in their Palo Alto home for a quiet anniversary dinner that would be anything but routine. The dining room walls displayed framed certificates from civil rights organizations, technology, innovation, awards, and congressional commendations. Recognition for work they had never intended to undertake, but had embraced with characteristic determination. Maya Reynolds, now serving on the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Advisory Board while maintaining her VP role at Reynolds Digital, reflected on how a simple flight to Phoenix had become a case study taught in business schools, law programs, and public policy courses worldwide. We just wanted to attend a technology conference. Instead, we accidentally started a civil rights revolution. Zara, whose impromptu live stream had documented discrimination for federal agencies and global audiences, had been invited to speak at the United Nations Human Rights Council about technology applications for bias prevention. The live stream was instinctive documentation, not strategic activism, but it proved that individual courage combined with technological accountability could create systematic change. Marcus Reynolds, whose emergency intervention had transformed corporate crisis management into industry-wide reform, was now consulting with federal agencies on artificial intelligence applications for civil rights enforcement beyond transportation. Your dignity and strength under discriminatory pressure created the foundation for systematic justice. Technology amplified your courage into institutional transformation. The numbers told the story of comprehensive change. The Reynolds Protocol was now operational across 847 airlines, globally monitoring over 2.3 million passenger interactions daily, and had prevented an estimated 47,000 discrimination incidents in its first year of implementation. The technology had expanded to hotels, rental car agencies, restaurants, retail stores, and healthcare facilities, creating systematic bias prevention across customer service industries. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, whose bias prevention training program had become the federal standard for discrimination rehabilitation, joined the family dinner to discuss program expansion into educational settings. The virtual reality experiences that help people understand discrimination from the recipient's perspective are being requested by school districts, universities, and corporate training programs worldwide. The rehabilitation success rates were encouraging. Jennifer Walsh had completed comprehensive bias recognition training and returned to customer service with consistent positive performance ratings. Her story demonstrated that discrimination could be corrected through awareness and accountability, rather than termination and stigma. Jennifer's transformation proves that people can change when given proper education and support. Dr. Rodriguez explained, "The technology provides real-time feedback that prevents unconscious bias from affecting customer interactions, creating learning opportunities, rather than just punishment consequences." Alex Rivera, now Director of Ethics and Accountability for the Airlines for America Trade Association, shared data about employee response to algorithmic bias monitoring. Customer service representatives initially worried that technology would replace human judgment, but they discovered it enhances ethical decision-making by providing immediate coaching when bias indicators are detected. The employee support for systematic bias prevention had grown steadily as workers realized that technology protected them from unconscious mistakes that could damage careers and harm customers. The system created accountability without punishment, learning without shame, and prevention without micromanagement. Robert Kellerman, joining the dinner via video conference from Phoenix, where he was volunteering with civil rights organizations, provided perspective on personal transformation through bias recognition. "My assumptions on Flight 847 were embarrassing and harmful, but they represented unconscious patterns that many business professionals carry without examination. Technology that flags discriminatory assumptions creates opportunities for growth." His volunteer work with civil rights organizations had evolved into leadership roles in bias prevention education for corporate executives. His story demonstrated that discrimination awareness could lead to productive activism rather than defensive denial. Dr. Sarah Chen, whose medical documentation had supported federal investigations and healthcare bias prevention programs, provided updates on systematic discrimination prevention in medical environments. The adapted Reynolds protocol has been implemented in over 300 hospitals, monitoring patient interaction patterns and treatment recommendations for bias indicators that could affect healthcare quality. The medical applications were revealing discrimination patterns that traditional quality assurance had missed, subtle differences in pain assessment treatment recommendations, bedside manner, and discharge planning that correlated with patient demographics rather than clinical indicators. The federal response had exceeded all expectations. The Civil Rights Restoration Act, inspired directly by the Flight 847 incident, and Reynolds Protocol success, required bias monitoring technology for all federal contractors and recipients of federal funding. The legislation created the largest systematic discrimination prevention program in American history. Representative Lisa Johnson, the Transportation Subcommittee Chair, who had led congressional hearings on bias prevention technology, joined the anniversary dinner to discuss federal policy expansion. The Flight 847 incident demonstrated that individual courage could catalyze systematic change when combined with technology and corporate accountability. The federal requirements for bias monitoring create comprehensive civil rights protection. The international response had been equally significant. The European Union was implementing similar bias prevention requirements. The United Nations was developing global standards for artificial intelligence, civil rights applications, and developing countries were requesting technical assistance for discrimination monitoring systems. Maya reviewed the academic research that had emerged from their experience. Over 200 peer-reviewed studies have analyzed the Flight 847 incident and Reynolds Protocol implementation. The research confirms that algorithmic bias detection creates more effective civil rights enforcement than complaint-based systems, while providing cost-effective prevention for businesses. The studies showed that systematic bias prevention through technology was more efficient, comprehensive, and sustainable than traditional diversity training or complaint processing. The artificial intelligence learned from every interaction, becoming increasingly sophisticated at detecting subtle discriminatory patterns. Zara shared social media analytics showing continued engagement with bias prevention education. The original live stream has been viewed over 12 million times, but more importantly, it's generated thousands of follow-up posts about recognizing and challenging discrimination in everyday situations. The viral impact had created ongoing conversations about bias, privilege, dignity, and respect that extended far beyond the transportation industry. The story had become a cultural touchstone for discussions about systematic discrimination and technological solutions. Marcus addressed the broader implications of their experience. Flight 847 proved that technology can create accountability at scale, making discrimination operationally difficult rather than just legally prohibited. But technology alone isn't sufficient. It requires courage, integrity, and commitment to systematic justice rather than individual revenge. The anniversary dinner concluded with reflection on lessons learned and challenges remaining. Systematic bias prevention through technology was proving effective, but implementation required ongoing commitment, adequate funding, and cultural change that valued prevention over punishment. Maya looked around the table at faces of people who had been transformed by their shared experience of discrimination documentation and systematic change. We learned that individual dignity matters, that technology can create justice at scale, that courage inspires systematic transformation, and that accountability enables growth rather than just consequences. The legacy was clear. Flight 847 had demonstrated that discrimination could be prevented through comprehensive monitoring, immediate intervention, and systematic accountability. Individual courage had become institutional transformation through technology that made bias visible, expensive, and operationally difficult. The lessons extended beyond civil rights to broader questions about technology, justice, corporate responsibility, and social change. The story had become a model for how individual integrity could create systematic transformation when supported by appropriate technology, legal authority, and cultural commitment to dignity and respect. 1 year later, the Reynolds family understood that their flight to Phoenix had never really ended. It had become a permanent journey towards systematic justice that would continue as long as discrimination threatened human dignity and technological solutions enabled comprehensive prevention and accountability. The departure gate at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport looked identical to every other airline gate, but for Maya and Zara Reynolds, boarding Flight 847's anniversary route carried the weight of transformation that had rippled across industries, influenced federal policy, and redefined corporate accountability in the age of artificial intelligence. Exactly 1 year after their original flight had become a catalyst for systematic change, the sisters settled into seats 1A and 1B with a mixture of familiarity and profound awareness of how much had evolved. The flight attendant who greeted them, Alex Rivera, now promoted to senior crew leadership, smiled with genuine warmth rather than suspicious assessment. "Ms. Reynolds, welcome aboard," Alex said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone whose ethical integrity had been validated and rewarded. "It's an honor to have you flying with us on this significant anniversary." The cabin environment felt fundamentally different, not just because they were recognized and respected, but because systematic change had altered the basic dynamics of passenger treatment. The Reynolds protocol monitors, discreetly embedded throughout the aircraft, created real-time accountability that made discriminatory behavior operationally difficult rather than merely prohibited. Maya activated her tablet, displaying comprehensive statistics from the first year of systematic bias prevention implementation. The numbers told a story of transformation that exceeded their most optimistic projections. 89%. Reduction in documented discrimination incidents, over 47,000. Prevented bias situations, and $340 million saved in litigation costs across participating airlines. The technology worked exactly as designed, Maya told Zara, as they reviewed the anniversary report. Artificial intelligence flagged discriminatory patterns before they affected passenger treatment, created learning opportunities instead of just punishment consequences, and enabled systematic prevention rather than reactive complaint processing. But the deeper transformation was cultural rather than technological. The airline industry had evolved from grudging compliance with civil rights regulations to proactive bias prevention that protected passenger dignity and corporate reputation simultaneously. Discrimination had become too expensive, too visible, and too systematically prevented to remain an acceptable business risk. Captain Tom Bradley, the same pilot who had navigated the original crisis with professional integrity, made a brief announcement acknowledging the anniversary significance. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks 1 year since Flight 847 became a catalyst for industry-wide transformation in passenger dignity and respect. We're honored to operate this commemorative flight with the same commitment to systematic bias prevention that has made aviation more equitable for all travelers. The passenger manifest reflected the democratization of air travel that systematic bias prevention had enabled. Families who previously avoided flying due to discrimination concerns now traveled confidently, knowing that algorithmic monitoring provided protection from profiling. Young professionals of color boarded first-class cabins without fear of having their belonging questioned. Elderly passengers, disabled travelers, and anyone who looked different from traditional airline demographics experienced respectful service as standard procedure rather than exceptional courtesy. Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatrician, whose witness testimony had supported federal investigations, was aboard the anniversary flight to present medical research on the health benefits of discrimination prevention. Systematic bias prevention has measurable positive effects on passenger stress levels, travel anxiety, and overall well-being, she explained to a small group of journalists covering the anniversary. Technology that prevents discriminatory treatment creates healthier travel environments for everyone. The broader impact extended far beyond aviation. The Reynolds Protocol had been adapted for healthcare settings, educational institutions, financial services, retail environments, and government agencies. Systematic bias prevention was becoming standard operating procedure, wherever artificial intelligence could monitor human interactions for discriminatory patterns. Jennifer Walsh, the former senior flight attendant, whose discriminatory behavior had triggered the systematic transformation, was not aboard the anniversary flight. But her rehabilitation story had become a model for bias correction through education rather than termination. She now worked as a bias prevention trainer, helping other customer service professionals recognize and correct unconscious assumptions. Robert Kellerman, the passenger whose discriminatory assumptions had supported the original incident, submitted a written reflection for the anniversary coverage. My behavior on Flight 847 was embarrassing and harmful, but it represented unconscious biases that many people carry without examination. The systematic change that followed created opportunities for growth, rather than just consequences for mistakes. The anniversary flight carried passengers whose lives had been directly improved by systematic bias prevention, families who traveled without fear of discrimination, employees who worked in accountability-focused environments, and individuals who had experienced respectful treatment in customer service interactions across multiple industries. Maya looked around the transformed cabin, seeing faces that reflected the diversity of modern America, traveling with dignity and respect that systematic bias prevention had made possible. The technology created accountability, but the real change was cultural shifting from individual punishment to systematic prevention, from complaint-based enforcement to algorithmic monitoring, from diversity training to bias prevention. Zara activated her phone to document the anniversary moment, but this time, the live stream audience was global rather than viral. United Nations representatives, European Union policymakers, and civil rights organizations worldwide were monitoring the anniversary as a case study in technology applications for social justice. 1 year ago, we just wanted to reach Phoenix for a business conference. Zara addressed her international audience. Instead, we accidentally demonstrated that individual courage combined with technological accountability could create systematic change that protects human dignity at scale. The flight landed in Phoenix on schedule without incident, with comprehensive documentation showing zero bias indicators detected throughout the journey. The absence of discrimination was now measurable, quantifiable, and systematically maintained through artificial intelligence that never tired, never made assumptions, and never allowed unconscious bias to affect passenger treatment. As they deplaned, Maya and Zara understood that their journey had become permanent, not as passengers seeking respectful treatment, but as architects of systematic change that would protect future generations from experiencing discrimination in customer service environments. The flight had ended, but the transformation continued. Every passenger interaction monitored by artificial intelligence, every discriminatory pattern prevented through real-time intervention, and every individual treated with dignity, regardless of appearance, represented the ongoing legacy of two sisters who refused to give up seats they had rightfully purchased. Flight 847 had become more than travel. It had become a symbol that individual integrity could create systematic justice when combined with appropriate technology, corporate accountability, and comprehensive commitment to human dignity and respect. The plane doors closed, but the revolution in civil rights enforcement through artificial intelligence continued across industries' borders and generations, proving that courage documented with technology could transform the world. If this story resonated with you, we want to hear from you. Have you experienced discrimination while traveling at work or in customer service situations? Have you witnessed bias that went unchallenged? Share your experiences in the comments below. This isn't just entertainment. It's education about how technology can create accountability and how individual courage can spark systematic change. When we document discrimination, when we refuse to accept unfair treatment, and when we demand better from the institutions that serve us, we create a better world for everyone. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or where they come from. Subscribe to stay updated on stories that matter. Stories about justice, accountability, and the power of standing up for what's right. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Whether they're facing discrimination themselves or they're in a position to challenge bias in their workplace or community, this story demonstrates that change is possible when courage meets technology and corporate accountability. The Reynolds family transformed a moment of discrimination into a movement for systematic change. Their flight to Phoenix became a journey toward justice that continues today. What will your next flight, literal or metaphorical, become? Remember, you don't need to be a CEO's daughter to demand respect. You don't need advanced technology to document unfair treatment. And you don't need corporate power to make a difference. You just need the courage to say no to discrimination and yes to dignity. Thanks for watching. And remember, your voice matters, your experience counts, and your courage can change the world.